All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Town Hall. We're going to get right into it tonight. Tonight is Thursday, March 13th. We're here for a budget work session, joint session with the school committee. First order of business, as always, is Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. Next on the agenda is the land acknowledgement statement, which I will read. The town of South Kingstown pays homage to the indigenous people and land on which the town is now located. Let this acknowledgement serve as a reminder of our ongoing efforts to recognize, honor, reconcile, and partner with the Narragansett tribe, whose land and water we benefit from today. All right, now we're going to get right into it. As I said, we're here for a joint budget work session to discuss the school department's budget. I'm going to turn it over to Town Manager Jim Maney to give a brief introduction.
Thank you, Council President. Welcome, School Committee. I'll be very brief, and then I'll turn it back to you, Council President. You can turn over to the schools at that point. So the town manager's budget that I presented to the town council last week, the town appropriation in the proposed town manager's budget is level funded for the years for the fiscal year 25-26. So what that translates to is that the town manager budget does not reflect an increase in tax revenue transferred to the school department. The schools and the superintendent and Ryan, the finance director, and I, and Brian Sylvia have met several times, and we have a good relationship. The schools had asked for an increase of $500,000 in a property tax transfer from the town, plus approximately $309,000 pick up shared services. And what are the shared services? These are things that the town already pays half for, is school resource officer, crossing guard, field maintenance, tax software, and IT support. So that is where we're at right now, Mr. President, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Jim. I'm now going to hand it over to the school administration. I know you guys got a presentation, so go ahead.
Thank you, Council President. Good evening, Council President McEntee, honorable members of the Town Council, School Committee Chair Vetter, honorable members of the School Committee, Town Manager Maney, members of the South Kingstown School Department administration team, as well as educators and valued community members of South Kingstown. The FY26 proposed budget we are about to present to you represents more than just numbers. It reflects difficult choices and careful prioritization. Our administrative team has worked diligently to reduce our initial budget projections by over $1.5 million, while preserving the educational excellence our community expects and our students deserve. While tonight's presentation is admittedly dense, we have purposely crafted it to respond to community comments and to address common misunderstandings that often accompany discussions about school obligations, laws, and regulations that affect schools and school districts. We've organized our presentation this evening with natural milestones where we hope we can pause to address questions, ensuring everyone leaves with a clear understanding of our budgetary decisions and constraints. I'm confident that after our presentation, we will have demonstrated how our request is an embodiment of our commitment to three fundamental principles I spoke of first on December 18th. Stability, in maintaining our core educational programs despite fiscal challenges. We've scrutinized every line item to ensure we protect the classroom experiences that form our students' educational foundation. Stewardship through responsible fiscal management. The $1.5 million in reductions reflects our understandings that every dollar represents a taxpayer investment. We've targeted inefficiencies, consolidated where possible, and deferred non-essential expenditures. Responsiveness to both educational needs and municipal constraints. While making these substantial reductions, we've listened carefully to stakeholders across our community about preserving educational quality. Despite these significant reductions, we are respectfully requesting approximately $800,000 in additional funding to maintain the high-quality education our community values and deserves. This request represents the minimum needed to maintain our contractual class sizes, support our most vulnerable student populations, fulfill contractual obligations, and continue the educational and extracurricular programming that is currently in place this academic and school year. This joint meeting represents an important opportunity for collaborative problem solving. We recognize the fiscal constraints facing our municipality and are committed to doing our part to address these constraints as is appropriate for a school district to do so. I look forward to a productive discussion tonight about how we can collectively support our most precious resources, our students and families. And with that, I am pleased to turn this over to our presentation to Chief Financial Officer, Mr. Ryan Kilpatrick.
Thank you, Mr. Pedraza. Good evening, Mr. President, members of the council, Madam Chair, members of the committee. It is my pleasure to walk you through our fiscal 2026 proposed budget. So we will dive right in. We can go right to the agenda. Here you can see where we're headed this evening, and you'll notice we've included some intermissions, we'll call them, some breaks for questions, and so you can gain some clarification as needed. With that, we will dive right in to slide 3, our bottom line right up front. So we're not going to hold you in suspense here. So in order to recreate this school year next year, it would cost us an additional $2.4 million, which is net of expected revenue loss and increased expense. Thus, we reduced expenses by approximately $1.6 million, which left us with a remaining shortfall of about $800,000. To close this gap, we are requesting an additional $500,000 to the property tax transfer for a total of $56.4 million, which represents a 0.9% increase over the current appropriation. In addition, we are requesting to shift approximately $300,000 in what we're calling shared services expenses to the town, which does not increase the maintenance of effort. So the total impact of our request to the town is $809,830. Our fiscal 2026 general fund budget represents a 0.04% decrease from fiscal year 25. Increase from fiscal year 25, apologies. And our total budget across all funds decreased by 2.5%. Next slide, please.
So we wanted to make sure that we acknowledged, and I did so in my opening, to recognize the efforts that our educators as well as administrators have done in creating this budget. And so what I wanted to make sure that we highlighted is that although we still have 1/3 of the year yet, we have had multiple successes across every school and across the district, and there's still 1/3 of the year to go. So as we go into this presentation, not only is it fiscally responsible or a fiscally responsible exercise to build upon the foundation based off of fiscal metrics, but it's also educational and programming. So again, we have much to be proud of, and it's our hope that we get to build and maintain these successes and continue to improve upon them.
Okay, next slide, please. All right, so now we'll discuss the process for how we developed our budget. So again, we started with a thesis of recreating this current school year next year under next year's fiscal conditions. And the assumptions we used to build the budget are as follows. So first we have our contractual increases. We have our collective bargaining contractual increases at 2.5% for our NEA union, that's our teachers union, 2.25% for our support and clerical staff, that's SKESP, and 2.25% for our Council 94 union, which is our custodians and maintenance staff, which is to be determined as we have to negotiate a new contract with them before the end of this fiscal year. And also a 2% increase for our administrative staff. We budgeted for 8% increases in health and dental benefits based on preliminary estimates from the Rhode Island Trust. And we have a contractual 4% increase with our transportation vendor as we enter the last year of our agreement with them. Looking at enrollment, we used the New England School Development Council's, or NESDEC's, projections for pre-K and kindergarten, and for all other grades we simply rolled over from the current year into the next. And we are holding our out-of-district enrollment projections flat for fiscal 26 based on overestimating in fiscal 25 and our best estimate of how the cohorts will move forward. And lastly, we anticipate our state aid to be reduced by approximately $197,000 and our federal aid to be reduced due to expiring funds, reduced carryover, and the general uncertainty surrounding Washington, D.C. at the moment. Next slide, please. Okay, the results. So essentially, if we wanted to recreate this school year next year, we need an additional $2.4 million. This is obviously an unfeasible request, So our next step was to find reductions to balance the budget and simultaneously minimize the impact to the students. So first, we reduced staffing to the tune of $1.49 million, which includes 2 administrative positions, 11 NEA bargaining unit members, 5 support professionals, and 1 custodial maintenance position. Additionally, we found roughly $98,000 in reductions to equipment, software, supplies, and professional development, and these reductions totaled $1.59 million, leaving us with a remaining shortfall of approximately $809,830.
If I may, I just want to point out that with the exception of a unfilled, never filled assistant maintenance director position, unfortunately, all of the positions, all of those 16.8, with the exception of the assistant maintenance director, are real positions. And I do want to highlight that none of these are reductions due to performance. This is strictly fiscal, but these are not imagined positions. These are filled positions. These are not proposed. There is nothing new in terms of our requested that is not a actual person currently in the district and currently serving our students and faculty and community.
Next slide, please. Slide 7. So here is our proposal for balancing the budget. So first, we're requesting an additional $500,000 from the town, which is a 0.9% increase over the current appropriation. And next, we're requesting to shift $309,000 of what we're calling shared services expenses to the town. Our logic here was twofold. Number one, this would not increase the maintenance of effort, thus minimizing the impact to the taxpayers. And number two, these are primarily town employees for whom we exercise no oversight. The specific line items were alluded to by Town Manager Manny, so I won't belabor the point. The total impact proposed to the town is $809,830. $500,000 on the revenue side, $300,000 on the expenditure side. Next slide, please.
So while we are trying to recreate what's been a wonderful school year thus far, I do not want to give the impression that they are able to be exactly the same given the face of this, given these closures. The main difference would be summer programming. We would be able in this budget, in order to continue to provide high school credit recovery, which is essential to our graduation rate. But what it does not provide is we do not have any summer programming for elementary and middle school students, known in terms of enrichment. We do still have budgeted and are federally and state and locally required to provide ESY, or extended school year services. Those are budgeted, and that is required, and that is a separate bucket. So we are unable to provide that, and that is primarily due, as those have been paid for ESSER. ESSER 3 funds, which expired in September. In terms of programming and staffing, while we attempted to maintain, and we are currently in compliance with the Basic Education Plan, or BEP, in this budget, we are able to continue all but one programming component for next school year, and we do have staffing levels that we anticipate will be in accordance with our contractual obligations. What this proposed budget or difference does not include, it does not include previous levels of curricular and administrative support to our building administrators and teachers. It does not, we are not able to reduce class sizes at specific schools or in specific areas. It does not increase student supervision and support during non-instructional times, such as lunches, recess, before school or leaving school. When we have a decrease in faculty and staff, we are unable to offer the same electives that we are year to year. And lastly, as I mentioned before, this does not provide any new targeted assistance program or any new program or initiatives that would have us target specifically a new initiative or a specific achievement gap.
First intermission.
All right, do we have any questions here? I know there's some slides that are further on that sort of relate to some of the information here, so I think we should sort of proceed and then wait till the end.
Okay, slide 10.
So as we dive into enrollment, what we first wanted to do to set the stage is because we have, when we talk about enrollment, and we have our charts labeled as in-district and out-of-district enrollment. In both cases, these are students by which we are responsible for educating either in total or at least in some part. Okay, these are not referring to students whom select to go to a private school, in-state, out-of-state, for whatever reason. These are, all of the numbers reflected here are the students of which the taxpayers of South Kingstown Public Schools are fiscally responsible for. However, where they are attending and where they are getting their education and or their services will vary. These generally come into buckets, or when we refer to as in-district, are those students who are in our schools currently, so that they are in any 5, receiving the wonderful education from our educators and administrators, while the out-of-district can include charter schools, CTE, private schools, but still receiving their special education services, or may also be experiencing homelessness and are being transported to other schools that were previously their home districts.
Thank you. Next slide, slide 11. Here you can see our in-district enrollment trend going back to 2017 and 18 and our projection for fiscal year 2026. So enrollment has been declining at about 4.2% per year on average over this span. It is down roughly 27% in the aggregate. As mentioned earlier, our pre-K and kindergarten enrollment projections are based on the NSDEC most recent enrollment report, and all other grades are simply a rollover from the current fiscal year. The current year trend, as in current school year, appears to show a slowdown in outmigration, which we are hopeful that will continue next year. Next slide, please. Here's a snapshot of our out-of-district enrollment trend since 2017 and 18. These are general education students who reside in South Kingstown but enroll in charter schools, also known as public schools of choice, career and technical education or CTE programs at other public schools or state-sponsored schools, and special education students enrolled in independent schools by the district or enrolled in private schools and receiving services according to their individual education plans or IEPs. You'll notice we've recognized a roughly 59% increase in out-of-district enrollments over the past 8 years, but based on current year data, we're hoping this trend has peaked and will reverse as we go forward. Our fiscal 26 projection is based on the current number of students, again, due to overestimating our fiscal 25 number of out-of-district enrollments and our best estimate of how those grade cohorts will shift going forward. Our fiscal year 25 projected expense, so current year, for these students is about $6.3 million, and our budgeted expense for next year is just north of $7 million. The cost increase is based on an increase in the local share rates, so even though we're projecting the same number of students, those local tuition rates and the private tuition rates we are expecting to increase next year. So closely related to enrollment is staffing, which is where we'll turn now.
The one, as we go or discuss briefly in terms of the out-of-district trend, we'd just like to highlight that in terms of these are outside of certain urban core or other communities, the fact of 2 private charter schools in district as well as private schools, and another one that is often coming in are outliers for the town of South Kingstown that other communities do not have to face, and that's often brought up when comparing South Kingstown to other communities, is that out-migration that is within that district, those opportunities are just not there, and so that is a unique outlier. Additionally, so that while that out-migration, you are not going to a strange town, you are not going to somewhere you've never been before, those communities also do not have to then bear the transportation for those students as well. They would if they went to out-of-district. So again, there is a unique outlier, both in terms of impact to the overall budget because of this enrollment. Again, in-district tuition to charter schools, as well as then increased transportation that other communities just do not face. And so it cannot be an apples-to-apples comparison between Barrington, East Greenwich, Narragansett, and South Kingstown, or any other community for that matter.
Can I just ask a quick question, Mr. Superintendent? So I understand there's 126 students at the charter schools. Do they come back for middle school and high school, or do they always stay out?
Based on the grade configurations, and in terms of the reporting that they have to do, they may leave us and that we don't know where they're going to be going. Many of them do come back to us, but in terms of knowing specifically what percentage go and come back, I don't have that data available.
Just want to look, does anyone here, do we ever track that? Because I'm thinking like when Compass ends at K-8, I think, do they come to the high school? Does anyone track that or no?
We only track the ones who come. We can't track the ones who don't come. Because we would rely on Compass or Kingston Hill to give us information about families who don't come to our district, if that makes sense. Right? So the ones who do come, we know who they are, but we don't know where the other ones go, whether they move out of state or whether they go to where they go, if that makes sense.
So could you just, when you look at that charter number, do you know, is it 35 people show up at the high school from Compass and Kingston Hill, or, you know?
So there are the big two migration years tend to be, sixth grade will be one in which we saw that increase, in which we saw more students coming back. And when we take a look at this year's trend, what becomes difficult in terms of going from 8th to 9th grade is that is where generally we'll see, regardless of what community I've been involved in, that 10% of, am I going to private, am I going to go play sports somewhere, am I potentially moving? So those are the two biggest years that we see either in migration and out, but further complicating that is we do have charter schools that are ending at grade 8, and so there's no natural progression for them. So what percentage of Compass grade 8 comes back to us in grade 9 versus also continues to go to Hendrick and Prout, LaSalle, or some other community we just don't have a good handle on. Hopefully, at our next hearing, we are in the process of revising our residency policy, actually, which will require that proof of residency for CTE, charter, and homeschool students, so we can have a yearly census regarding in-state as well as great improved financial tracking to ensure that we are indeed paying for residents.
Right. The reason why I started asking is because as we build a new high school, this is an opportunity to pull those people over and not lose them. So I just didn't know if typically you had 10 or 20, and maybe we would get 30 or 40 to stay or come. That's all.
Thank you.
Superintendent, so this doesn't include parochial schools? Like 8th graders leaving to parochial schools?
It would not. It would. We're still talking of out of district. This would only those students who are receiving IEP services.
Okay. Thanks.
You're very welcome.
The other thing that factors into this is something Mr. Pedraza and I discussed at our school committee meeting on Tuesday night. Our students have school choice, so they can go to a public school that has a CTE program that they're interested in. But we don't have any way of tracking if, a student goes to school A to study, a particular CTE. We don't have any way of finding out if that student remains in that CTE or does not and still stays at that out school that we're continuing to pay for. The other thing, realists we've asked, they won't give us the information. The other thing is that, parents that choose to send their children to Catholic or parochial private high schools, some of them don't let us know. As an educator, countless years, Johnny went to LaSalle, but we don't have any documentation on that at all, and that's the first week of school. And so what ends up is on our plate, we have to track Johnny down, and there's probably 10 or 15 more Johnnies.
I'm just trying to make sure that we get every person to come back to the high school building.
Absolutely.
So, back in the day, we would be able to track who went to parochial schools because we used to have to pay for the books. I don't know if there are books anymore.
So there are books, and we are still obligated to pay as long as they are on the Rhode Island Department of Ed officially adopted textbook list, and that we offer those. So we do still incur that cost. We still incur the cost not only of textbooks, but also of transportation for private school students to some degree, consistent with Rhode Island general law. There is currently bills in committee at the State House regarding that issue. But we do incur those costs. But in terms of whether they take the bus, tell us they want the bus, so we don't have an accurate tracking. Additionally, through the Office of Teaching and Learning and our federal grants, we do outreach to every single private school in order to request the roster of who attain there in order to see if they would like to participate in Title I, Title II, Title III, Title IV funding. It is not uncommon to receive no response, especially if they are not interested in participating. So those traditional tracking metrics that used to occur in most cases no longer exist. In terms of this slide, I wanted to put it up there because often from comments for the community, we've often hear, we've taken an analysis of South Kingstown and it seems to be top step heavy. I would argue that in most cases, if not all cases, that is fantastic. We have experienced, dedicated, committed educators, but that is also because when we have gone through an enrollment trend like we have, we are required to cut from the bottom step up. So when you have 7 years of reducing a faculty and staff, every single year you are not able, or you are not cutting you're not able to cut from the bottom end of the top step. So as long as we continue to try and balance budgets based off of faculty and staff reductions, paired up with changes to the retirement system, we are going to have for a long time a top tier and top step faculty and staff that is skewed towards that end. Again, while our local colleges and universities are putting out wonderful teachers to some extent, or not to some extent, I won't mince words, this is a good problem to have. Having experienced, caring, dedicated educators who stick with you over the course of what this community has gone through is an asset and not a liability. But also, even if you wanted to change it, Rhode Island general law would prohibit doing so.
All right, next slide. Continuing our discussion of staffing. So here you're going to see our staffing trends since 2017 and 18 by position category. So our instructional staff is down roughly 21% over this span, which matches the total staffing trend since the peak in 2018 and 19. For fiscal year 26, we are reducing 16.8 positions across the district for a total budgeted FTE count of 368.1, a 4.4% decrease from fiscal 25. These reductions are tied primarily to enrollment declines, although, as Superintendent Pedraza just alluded to, the correlation is not exact. Next slide, please.
Go ahead, we're just going to keep going.
Very good. All right, and now we'll look at our overview of our funds. So here you'll see, starting on the left, our general fund, also known as our operations budget, which is financed by the town tax appropriation, state aid, Medicaid reimbursements, tuitions, and other income. We also have our restricted funds, which consist primarily of state and federal grants. Then we have our sole enterprise fund, which is for the National School Lunch Program, financed by meal sales and federal reimbursements. And finally, we have our capital funds, where our capital improvement projects are tracked. Financed in recent years by the district's fund balance and federal grants from the Federal Communications Commission. Next slide, please. Here is our general fund revenue summary by object code. So starting at the top, you'll notice we have a $500,000 increase request to the property tax transfer. Below that, we're hoping to avoid using fund balance for operations this year. Our tuition income is based on our best estimates of students from other districts attending our CTE programs and also our preschool program. The school trust fund income has been relatively stable over the past few years, so we simply just budgeted in alignment with the current trend. Our miscellaneous revenue includes investment income, which we receive a portion of the town's cash deposit interest income, and charges for district activities and other miscellaneous items. Our formula and high-cost special education aid represent the governor's proposed allocations released on February 27th, 2025, for a total bottom line proposed of $63,087,510, which is a 0.04% increase over the current fiscal year. Next slide, please. So here you'll see our projected state aid, again, based on the most recent RIDE guidance published on February 27th, 2025. And this is subject to change based on the General Assembly's final state budget to be enacted in June. We are expecting a $117,176 reduction in formula aid, a $117,224 reduction in high-cost special education aid, and an increase of $37,243 in non-public transportation offsets, for a total state aid allocation of roughly $5.8 million, down $197,157 from the current year. And just as a matter of note, our public transportation aid is received through invoice credits, so that's on the expenditure side, while the other categories of aid are received in cash monthly from the state. Our state aid allocation also includes $150,168 in enrollment transition fund, which is also known as hold harmless offsets. There is no indication that these funds will sunset in the near future, so we're expecting them for this fiscal year and next fiscal year. That is in the formula aid number. Next slide, here we go, 19. All right, general fund expenditure summary. Starting at the top with salaries and benefits. So we do have a proposed increase even net of our reduction in staff, and it's just due to the collective bargaining contractual increases for the remaining staff. In our professional technical services category, we're expecting an increase there driven by absorbing some purchase services from our IDEA federal allocation. In the property and maintenance expenditures, we are expecting a net decrease due to shifting, as we alluded to at the beginning of the presentation, some shared services to the town. That is even net of our increasing HVAC and general repairs budget. In our 55,000 series, that's our other purchase service series, we're expecting a net decrease based on, again, our overestimating of our out-of-district tuitions and transportation. In the supplies and materials series, we're expecting a net decrease driven primarily by utilities and textbooks. In the capital series, we have a minor increase based on student technology and software needs. And then lastly, in our miscellaneous category, we're projecting a minor increase based on professional dues and fees for our full administrative staff. Again, our total bottom line is $63,087,510. Moving now to our capital fund. So in the table above, you'll see our proposed revenue, and below that is the table of our proposed expenditures. Our revenue sources are our fund balance and federal grants, and our expenditures are tied to the projects you'll see on the next slide, and they're the same projects that we presented back in January of this year at the Town Council, for a total bottom line budget of $1,142,215. Of this amount, we are anticipating using $1,095,000 in fund balance. The other $46,000 we're expecting to get from federal grants. Here's a summary of our proposed capital projects for next year. On the left is our summary of technology and equipment, and on the right is our facilities summary. These projects have not changed since the last time we presented them to the committee and the Town Council. Very good. Moving now to our summary of our restricted funds, primarily our federal and state grants. So again, we're anticipating decreases in revenue for most of these grant funds based on the uncertainty of federal aid policy decisions and our expectations of decreased carryover. Carryover is simply unspent funds from previous fiscal years. And thus, we're anticipating a total bottom line of $1.8 million, down $1.4 million or so from the current fiscal year, and that is driven primarily by the expiration of the ESSER III funds. Those expired on September 30th of last year. That's the $994,000 decrease you see. Moving now to our summary of our enterprise fund, our school lunch fund. So we're anticipating reduced sales and federal reimbursements, which are tied to reduced enrollment and new participation rates. This is subject to change based on our contract renewal with Chartwell's, our current vendor, which we have to execute later this spring. So I'll have more solidified numbers at that time. But total bottom line as of this period is $740,000, down $160,000 from the current year. Okay, moving on to our discussion of fund balance. So, as we transition into our discussion of fund balance, we simply wanted to offer you some recent guidance from the Government Finance Officers Association. So in May 2023, the GFOA published an article titled, "Should We Rethink Reserves?" So here's a quote from that article that captures the new recommended framework for approaching reserves. So essentially, the GFOA recommends cities and towns adopt an insurance view of reserves rather than reserves as a savings account. The GFOA recommends that they should be tied to a community's risk profile rather than arbitrary percentages. And so with that in mind, we'll dive into our fund balance and surplus history on the next slide. So here, first we'd like to clarify the key differences between surplus and fund balance. So a surplus is a one-year excess of revenues over expenditures. That's unique to one fiscal year. So here you can see our surplus and our deficit trend going back to 2017 and 18. Red means deficit, green means surplus. These are audited surpluses or deficits at the end of the fiscal year. Fund balance, on the other hand, is net assets at a given point in time, or rather the accumulation of surpluses over multiple fiscal years. So here you can see our fund balance trend since 2017 and 18. And again, just referring to the GFOA's most recent guidance, best practices may be to tie our reserve policy to our risk profile rather than to percentages. And as such, the district's current policy, which requires us to have between 1 and 2% of our operating budget and fund balance, is most likely outdated and just ripe for updating and revision.
Ryan, before we move on from there, do you have an anticipated surplus for the current fiscal year we're in, 24-25, as well as an anticipation of the fund balance at the end of the current fiscal year, 24-25?
Great question. The details will be on the next slide, but the short answer is no, because we do have a budgeted deficit for this year. So essentially, we had to appropriate $427,000 for operations and $1.1 million to capital. I'm expecting to land very close to that. So you'll see my proposed fiscal year-end fund balance on the next slide.
So about 3 months ago, you represented to us that you anticipated a surplus at the end of this current fiscal year of about $1 million. Since that time, more information has come in, and now you anticipate a deficit?
Nope, I don't remember making that comment, but I'm pretty sure last year was probably when I made that prediction. I've pretty much been expecting a deficit this year since the beginning.
What's the deficit?
But it's a budgeted deficit. So we have a revenue source. It's our fund balance.
Yeah. And what's the deficit you anticipate?
1.59 million, the 427 plus the 1.1, roughly.
And that's the current fiscal year that we're in operations. It's 9 months through right now.
Correct. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Can I ask a question about the Government Finance Officers Association? Is a mouthful too. Are the guidelines for a school board, school committee, or is that government in general?
It's cities and towns, but it can apply to school districts as well. It's all encompassing.
Right, so that your policy might be fine if the municipality is in a different position.
Well, we're going to have a pretty similar risk profile for the most part.
Right, okay. So, and I know we talked about it in the December meeting. What is 1 to 2%?
It's about 600,000 to 1.2 million.
Okay. So 600,000 to 1.2 million is the range for an acceptable fund balance?
Just policy, that's our policy.
That's your policy?
Correct.
But it's your opinion, and it's just an opinion, right? That
It's
it
an opinion
might be
informed
too,
by the GFOA, yes.
right, but that's for municipalities as well. So just,
We are technically under the municipal umbrella, so
Right.
it's,
right, but the town also has a fund balance, so just trying to understand that difference. Okay. And your current fund balance is
Deb, can I?
what? Yeah, go ahead, anytime.
The thing is, 1 to 2% is, it's arbitrary. What, the new guideline is that you should have reserves that reflect the risk that you're facing. So the more uncertainties that are out there, the more reserves you should have. Well, I think we're all can agree we're at a time of great uncertainty. So really, people should be building their reserves during this kind of fiscal uncertainty. That's what the guidance is moving toward. It's difficult because it's not something that's quantified, but given the risks are increasing and to have a decreasing fund balance, that it's kind of, we're working against what is becoming best practice. Does that make sense?
Yes, totally. So my question is, what is the fund balance? I know we talked about it in December, and some of it's, this 4.86, some of it was used for this fiscal year's capital. So I know it's not 4.4. I just want to know, what do you think it is? What do you think it will be?
I think it'll be $2,897,000. And
Well,
I'll walk you through that on the next slide. I have a visual.
Where do you see that one? Oh, the next page. Oh, there you go. I never looked ahead, sorry. I'm staying right with you.
All right, so here you'll see a schedule of our proposed fund balance usage for fiscal 26, along with our proposed hypothetical scenario if we need to use it for operations. So ideally, we'd like to avoid using fund balance as a revenue source for operations because it essentially creates a structural deficit, and that need will compound every year. So starting at the top, we're anticipating beginning fiscal 26, which means ending fiscal 25, with a fund balance of $2,897,671.
And Ryan, just to stop there, I want to work through how you get there.
Sure.
So you're at the 23-24 audited balance there, 4.4.
Yep.
You have to use that to fund the 1.5 million anticipated deficit,
Correct.
which brings it down to the 2.897.
Correct. Exactly right.
All right, go ahead.
So we've committed $1,095,000 to capital projects for next year, thus leaving us with approximately $1.8 million for operations. So if we subtract our request from the town, that would leave us with a fund balance of $993,068 at the end of fiscal 26. While this would put us within our current policy range, it would necessarily inhibit our ability to accomplish capital projects in fiscal 27 and beyond, and would not by itself cover our projected operating budget increases for fiscal 27.
The one piece here, and we do, so while we have not gone through an accounting-based risk profile of the district, when we talk about, where you take a look at what fund balance can be used for, as well as is used for, all of the bullets here in terms of the risks that the district has there. Unfortunately, I will point out that those are all things that have been incurred. So any of the examples that are up there, whether it be in this fiscal year when allegedly state aid came in higher than expected but required a higher percentage of OPEB contributions, and we then had to come up with close to $500,000 this year because we had fund balance. We did not need to come back before this body in order to do that. So that is the examples here that are given are real examples to South Kingstown Public Schools. So again, for this year, Given the reduced state and federal aid after budget adoption, FY25 is a prime example, and we have major federal unknowns every single day to what our aid will be federally and how that would be incurred. Increase of out-of-district enrollment in 2 years, FY21 and FY22, both saw the district see back-to-back years of increases of 33 additional students who went out of district. If we just assumed only a CTE cost or a charter cost, that's $20,000 per student. So while our enrollment is going down, an exodus like that, again, happens sometimes not just once, but twice in this case, in the case of South Kingstown. High-cost special needs in terms of IEP teams and their determinations, as well as in-migrations to the community. Unbudgeted litigation and settlements varies from year to year. And then we have the emergency facility repairs. Here, we're fortunate in that while in the 5-figure range, we do have recent examples, again, the hazard boiler needing to be fixed and replaced, and then I believe most recently, the Broad Rock Middle School HVAC system needing repairs in the 5 figures. Again, all of these unanticipated costs are able to be absorbed due to fund balance. And so, again, in most cases, you hope that none of these occur, but unfortunately, multiple can occur in any given year. And if we were to talk about emergency facilities repairs, that unfortunately we have experienced in our former life, the cost of a school roof would easily exceed $1.2 million on its own. So if we have a remaining fund balance of $900,000, again, the dangers of fund balance is revenue, and that would exhaust potentially at a time when budgets have been passed, federal aid has already been passed, budgets and tax rates have been set. Accordingly, this is why we are proponents of not using fund balance as revenue.
Ryan, before you go on, just one point I'd like to get clarified. The item number 2, capital improvements 1.09, is that the same as the maintenance requirement from Rhode Island Department of Education?
That's in addition to. That's in addition to. So our maintenance of effort for maintenance is already built into the general fund budget. Okay. That would add to that number.
Okay, thank you.
Got it.
Mr. Kilpatrick, I'd just like to make a comment that the policy that we have was drafted by the budget subcommittee for the school committee several years ago. And the reason that we put the 1 to 2% is that was what was considered best practices. And I can't give you a date on when we did that. But if the community and the council would know when Mr. Kilpatrick, and I can't find it now, but tonight when you were going through the slide, you made a comment that this moving to a risk assessment as opposed to a flat percent is considered best practices now, and that would be something we would possibly look at in the future. So I don't want the council or the community to assume that policy with the 1 to 2% is something that comes out of the Department of Education or the State House. That was a policy created by this school committee when that was best practices. That makes sense.
I did just sort of on that same point, I did want to highlight that the Government Finance Officers Association's information was from May of 2023. And in normal times, that may be recent, but I think all of us know that pretty much everything has changed. And it's, we're just at the beginning of this now. So we need to look at this from our perspective, in a realistic perspective, at what's going on. So that's all.
Fair points all around. Thank you. All right, next slide. Slide 28. So here is our budget summary for all funds. There's a lot of information here, I understand that, but key takeaway is our total bottom line is $66,839,725, which is a $1.7 million decrease from the current fiscal year, or roughly 2.5%.
And next slide, please. Again, summary by rationale. Again, our process is that we have got amazing educators, administrators working diligently on this budget, and most importantly, amazing students. And they're having what I would claim is a very successful year. And that foundation, or that the core of this academic year, provides the rationale to build upon for next year, and why we are comfortable in building next financial year off of this current school year. Again, we are unfortunately still required, though, to respond to our declining enrollment, as well as the fiscal challenges that face us all, which do result in the $1.59 million in cuts. Again, we are requesting a transfer, being cognizant of the maintenance of effort, essentially moving or not moving over $300,000 from one side of the ledger to another. And then we would also summarize that again, that the request that these funds be paid for coming out of general fund, outside of fund balance. Again, this does increase the maintenance of effort, but future increases obviously will be difficult, or may become difficult due to bond obligations. So we believe it's appropriate to shift in practices to the GFOA's rethinking reserves, because the historical risks encountered by the district are real, and unfortunately they are frequent, and they have required the use of fund balance. Additionally, the current risk factors facing the district do remain elevated in fiscal year 26. And with that, next slide. Okay, thank you, and are open to any more questions, comments, concerns, and answer any questions people may have.
All right, any questions from council members?
Superintendent, thank you for that great presentation and your team's effort in making sure that our students have the best level of education we can get. And I also want to thank all the teachers and the public that came out tonight to support education. Just a few hodgepodge of questions as it went through. How many duplicative services do you think that the school district has with the town of South Kingstown? How many duplicative services? Yeah. So you're doing the same thing. How many redundancies have you thought about for future budgets that we can say, hey, maybe we can purchase this together, maybe we can share these services, really share these services, as opposed to...
It's a great question. I don't have, specific figures in front of me, but it's certainly something we should consider going forward. There's definitely overlap. So I think it's a great plan. I don't have a number for you, but, there's certainly some contracts that we could probably bid out as a town and school to try to get some economies of scale, things of that nature. So,
Can I jump in and say that we do that with certain things. So I know Mr. Mahoney has worked with the town's finance maintenance directors. So there are some things that we do that with. Off the top of my head, I don't have them, but I know we do it. But to your point is we could probably do it more.
Well, it's good to hear, Kate, that we already do that. I'm sure that we can always do better. And the more communication that we have between the district and the town staff, right, who are doing the hard work, is going to be best for the taxpayers. We're trying to foot these bills and dive into how much we're really trying to get this new high school ready and going. Has the school district applied for Learn 365 grants in the past year?
my understanding is those are municipal grants and not school district grants.
So we have signed off mutually.
No, I have it in front of me, actually. Yes, it's with the Johnny King Center, and then we also had title but yes.
So we work in conjunction in collaboration with one another.
Have you applied for a new one this year? I know that you mentioned that if the new budget coming up is the middle school summer programming.
So we have applied, most recently, the town, Johnny Cakes, and the school district have signed off on an initial application for the Math Matters funds, which I believe are approximately current $60,000 for summer math enrichment.
Great.
Closing the achievement gap, and we have signed off on that, and we presented actually on Tuesday.
Excellent. How much, you mentioned earlier, with the current budget that we may not be able to have summer programming for some of our students, is that correct?
At the degree that we've offered it last school year.
And how much is that in total, like, were those services that we're not going to get for this upcoming summer?
So all of that told, so ESY, extended school year, credit recovery, and the Summer Learning Academy and the wraparound camps was approximately $200,000.
$200,000?
Not ESY, I'm sorry. No, I'm just saying the total summer programming, all encompassing, $200,000.
Gotcha.
Get my story straight.
But ESY is protected, so that is the total, but we're still gonna have, I wrote it down
Just
now.
talking about ESY,
Right.
correct.
So we're not losing, you following, Jay? We're not gonna, we're not, it's $200,000 for all of those programs, but some of those programs are gonna continue. You were asking for what wasn't gonna continue, correct?
Correct. That's what I was asking, yeah.
Right.
The reason I ask that is because sometimes when you need money for programming for students over a summer, you can find them elsewhere through a foundation, right? Or through a local benefactor, and I just didn't know if that was looked into.
Yep. So we continue to do that, hence your earlier, and working with the Johnny Cake Center, and actually with Dr. Kern earlier today. Additionally, as we get into, unfortunately, we're in the rewrite amendment period for FY25 on our federal grants. Those must expire, unfortunately, or the amendments must be spent before June 30th, and those are currently being worked on, so we can't apply those to summer programming. And when we do, unfortunately, oftentimes they are the least applicable because they have to go to students who are in the attendance zone. So if we were to offer summer programming at the elementary level through Title I, only students and families qualifying for Title I would be able to participate without additional funds coming from the district.
Thanks for walking me through that. I have a couple more questions, but I'll let my counselors go first if you want to go. Did I see there was a budget for maintenance for $50,000 for a vehicle?
Yes, correct, 55,000.
What kind of vehicle? What's the services?
We were looking to get a box truck.
For the facilities, you know, all
Correct.
that. Okay. My last question is, how many homeless students do we have? Sure. How many homeless students do we have?
It's a great question. I don't have it in front of me, but I can certainly get that for you.
That would be great just to follow up.
No.
I am done with my questioning.
Go ahead, Mike. Go ahead.
Can we spend a few minutes on slide 7 with respect to the concept of the town assuming the shared services? Can you walk us through each of them, starting with the school resource officers? There's 2, I believe, one at Broad Rock, one at the high school.
Correct. So the current arrangement is we split that cost 50-50 with the police department. So we pay $73,885. That's the budget number for next year. Police department assumes the other 73. My understanding is that we pay 100% for the crossing guards, but I would have to have Chief Moynihan correct me if I'm wrong. The field maintenance, that number is simply the actual amount charged this year for maintenance of the Curtis Corn fields, the athletic fields, and Hazard Field High School. The tax software is the Vision software. That $31,000 represents the actual fiscal 25 expense, and then the computer services is our IT support.
I don't understand what that means, tax software for the school department.
It's the Vision tax software for collecting the taxes. The software for collecting the taxes.
Okay. And computer services?
That is a portion of the IT manager's salary and benefits. because the IT manager manages the accounting system.
That's part of where we actually already are coordinating and collaborating between the two. Sure.
I'm sorry, what was the vision appraisal piece of it?
My understanding is the tax collection software and the appraisal software. But if I have that wrong, somebody please speak up. Correct.
That was my understanding as well, so that shouldn't really be on your budget, right? Right, it should never have been there in the first place, it doesn't sound like, and I'm curious as to why it's been on there for so long and how it has been unnoticed.
Now,
We don't
from
know.
a historical perspective, Steve Alfred, first, I'm not sure where the calculation came in, but that's how long ago it was factored out that was the school's share of the vision appraisal software, which we don't use it. Anybody can use it all across the nation, but that was his determination that the school should pay a certain percentage of that software, and it's been like that for X number of years.
It really doesn't make any sense to me, but it also kind of concerns me that it's been on there for all that time. It's sort of like the green M&Ms in the concert rider. So
I will say, to defend Steve, and I wasn't here on the council, and if Steve put it in, and I'm not saying it not to take it out, but there has to have been a methodical, clear rationale. That man was the town manager epitome, right, of things and research.
in his absence,
Sorry,
it
Jim.
doesn't make. I mean,
No, Jim said it. I think Jim said it once in his interview.
That hurts. That hurts.
I'm just saying,
I do want to bring us sort of back
there
to
has
the
to be
budget discussion.
I'm not saying it's illogical at this point, but it probably began as a very logical thing. And like things evolve over time, they change.
yeah. And so I do have a couple of other questions that I wanted to ask. One was on page 4, which is the successes, which are awesome, and I celebrate these with you. What I would like to know a little bit about is how Project Learn 365 played into these successes, how the partnership with URI and the Johnny Cake Center, as well as the planned expansion of the Community Learning Center at the Peacedale Library, will play into your plans to help our students achieve similar successes.
So those, much like here tonight, that collaboration between schools, community organizations, and the town coming together. So we actually, again, met with Dr. Kern as well as leadership of the Johnny Cake Center this afternoon to talk about all of the programs that we've proposed and those that have borne fruit, if you will. So it's that initial collaboration, that sign-off and that trust, as well as the robust work that our educators and administrators are doing. And we then, because we have that shared agreement, we also then are able to share that data to make sure that what is being worked on is targeted. It's not while it's fun, engaging, it is purposeful. It is targeted. And so as we move forward into this next foray of the Math Matters, we're taking those best practices and working together to see how we can continue that collaboration. So while it is technically not a school program and that the state funds won't come to us, they will be used in partnership to make sure that we have the expertise of our educators going there. We are currently, the Johnny Cake Center is currently tracking the metrics and did give me a draft report, but one that will not be finalized. We're not comfortable finalizing those numbers, especially as we get ready to ramp up into state testing season, and we still have one more naturally occurring round of what we'll refer to as, it's called STAR testing, or that progress monitoring, beginning, middle, end of year, and that's there that we can take a look at the progression, both for students who participate as well as those who don't, and then analyze what, if any, instructional methods or additional resources are bearing with success. And in some cases, then, or in most cases, take the ones that are showing that improvement or that high usage and need, and shift funds, greater funds to it to continue. For example, we talked about we have buckets in terms of attendance. Well, what we're finding is that really it's the attendance pushes coming from the schools, the text messages that are going out, the regular communication from teachers and administrators going out to parents, that is showing the greatest impact. As such, that community outreach regarding student chronic absenteeism, that bucket of funds can be shifted to academic programming, tutoring, after school, and get into the academic piece. So while I can't give you specifics right now, they are in process, and we have begun to shift to things that are showing signs, at least preliminarily, of not only where the Johnny Cakes and the supplemental is having positive effects, but also our own practices, and we're making sure to continue and expand those.
And you do see that those funds will be, or do you reasonably anticipate that this program will continue in the governor's budget for the next year?
I anticipate that at least some funds, given the dedication and commitment that this governor has shown throughout his duration as both governor and mayor, to the private-public partnership and community partnership. If I had to bet, I would bet that there would be some. But
Continue it, right? I know. I appreciate that, and I kind of feel the same way. And you did mention continuation of all but one program, and I was wondering which program that was.
Unfortunately, out of respect for the educators here, and because it would be individual specific.
I understand, sorry.
It's my fault for putting it out there. It would affect a sole individual. I would like the opportunity to meet with
I
them.
totally understand.
It is not something that it is, while it is eliminating a program, we are still in accordance with the BEP, as well as it is something that can be continued. The work that is going on there is a duplication, and that our building administrators have assured me that the level of support that is being offered is something that can be continued.
Okay, thank you. I don't want to keep going. I know Mike has something he wants to say.
I'd like to finish the discussion about page 7.
Sorry.
I'm trying to get the concept about us clawing back, so to speak, or shoving back the shared services that you've listed here. Particularly with the tax software and the computer services, we actually have the current town manager and finance director. They might want to offer an explanation for why that's set up the way it is.
So as stated previously, the tax software is something that's been in place since the former town manager Alfred. That has been in place, and for the same rationale given. As I understand it, the school department makes up X amount of the tax base. This is used to derive the tax bills and collect the tax bills, and that was my understanding where this was derived from.
I'm not sure what you mean by the school department makes up a certain amount of the tax base. Do you mean the physical
Collection
buildings?
of the revenue. The collection of the revenue.
Collection of the revenue.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. Yes.
I'm going to jump in here while we're on this topic here. So I just want to flesh this out a little further. So, when we approve a final budget, it's sort of a combined or consolidated budget, and that the net effect would likely be zero. But the actual difference and distinction here is that instead of cash coming out of the school department's fund, it would be cash coming out of the town's funds. That's what would be the net result here. Am I correct on this?
Yeah, I believe so. Essentially, it's currently being paid for in the tax levy. It's just on our income statement. If we were to move it to the town side's income statement, it's the same effect, only if the town doesn't find $300,000 in savings on their side of the budget.
So the purpose of this is allow you to free up cash. You see this as sort of a town service. You guys are paying for it. Don't understand why you're paying for it. It's really a town thing. And now you say, all right, this will free up cash.
To be fair, there is shared benefit here for some of these line items, right? So totally fair to pay for some of this, just to be fair. Essentially, it's just allowing us to absorb cost increases on the expenditure side without requiring the town to give us more cash.
You know, the town also has increases in expenses too, so when you just shift it, you know, that's something the municipal side has to absorb as well. So when you see an increase in expenses related to inflation, contractual obligations, benefits, whatever, we also see that.
Completely agree.
So that's something that needs to sort of be considered as we think through this budget. I have further questions, but I'll allow others to speak.
That's I want to keep working on this because you're introducing a new concept in terms of how we allocate the town transfer. The school resource officers and the crossing guards are clearly a school department use. It is for the benefit of the students, as all of this is anyway. But in terms of the actual provision of services, it's coming from the municipal side of the ledger, not the police department. And so in you asking for $140,000 for next year for school resource officers and crossing guards, you're essentially asking Chief Moynihan to find another $140,000 in his budget, or to have the town manager increase the police department budget by $140,000. So in some way or other, we kind of have to make the ledger work out one way or another. What I'm trying to assess is not just the money that you're asking for in that transfer, but the reasons for it, as to whether or not it's more appropriately municipal or school department. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So we absolutely, acknowledge and thank the town and our crossing guards and public safety and working in coordination with that. The thinking is that in terms of, again, trying to make sure that, again, we're focusing in originally on the educational programming, but at the same time, how do we increase things that we do not need to cut without increasing overall increasing the maintenance of effort towards the schools. And then the organizational piece of that is ultimately, for lack of a better word, who has oversight of these employees. And so while they work in our schools, our principals, our chief executives do not have, we don't have evaluation. So they work at the discretion of obviously the chief of police and at the town.
And I think actually that you hit the nub in the difference in the concepts. Oversight by municipal side, but benefit to the school department side. And that's what I need to process, so to speak. And I also understand what you're talking about, and for the benefit of the public, maintenance of effort is not a broadly understood topic, but one of the regulations from RIDE, and anybody wants to can correct me, is that year over year, you have to provide the town has to provide at least what it provided last year, absent some special circumstances. So by doing it this way, your argument is that you're not increasing, it's technically still level funding, so that in fiscal 27, we're not looking at least this $300,000 having to be increased, having to be maintained going forward. I'll give you an A for effort on that. I'm not sure yet where we're going to come out on this, but thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate the consideration.
So I just feel like I need to say a few facts, and I welcome anybody to tell me that they're not accurate, but I did talk to Jim. And so currently the tax rate is, if you pay taxes, is $11.05 per thousand. Okay, we all got our reevaluations, we all went like this, and then everyone says, well, don't worry, it's going to be a different rate. It absolutely is. It's going to be $9.04. However, it's hard to understand because that's this year's apple and next year's orange. So I asked Jim to tell me if we just kept the budget the way it is, level transfer to the schools, we adopt the budget that we proposed, that $11.05 would go to $11.36. Last year, We didn't have a property tax increase at all, so we paid $11.05 last year and this year. People get really upset about a dime, and we're looking at 31 cents without any increase or shifting of this 800,000. We typically say 68,000 is a penny, correct? Jim, right? Or is it 8? Do you want to now say 85? Do you want to say 85?
With the rebound numbers that we're dealing with now and the new assessment. Yes.
So if I stay with my 11 and my 1105 and 1136, it's still 68,000,
Yes.
right? So I'm just trying to explain so people understand. And so the debt, the reason why it's 31 cents, or what's the difference? 31 cents? 31 cents is for the debt service for the school bond, which is about $3 million. Eventually, we're going to have a $10 million debt service payment. So you can see that this year at $3 million, it's already 31 cents. It's going to grow. I'm just putting that out there. I'm not saying it's the right thing or the wrong thing, but people, when you talk about changing the tax rate to 904, people don't understand. It's still, this year, we would be giving you 31 cents more per thousand. What I have concerns about is when you shift to the town and we pick up any of the 309, it's like another nickel, right? Has to come from somewhere, or as Ryan says, find it in your savings. We try to, we will, we could try, but that's still another nickel, right? So then if we weren't good at finding that money, we'd be looking at 30, whatever that is. I'm not adding in my head, 41 cents, right? So we can't just keep going to the people who are all complaining about their electric bill or the price of eggs or their stock market, if they have a stock market. People are worried, and so I only say that because I worry about it. I worry about, like Patty said, we don't know where we're at, and we're already looking at 31 cents increase, which is 3.37%. Most of that's for the debt service, for the school bond, but that's not all the school bond money that we'll eventually pay, so I just want to explain it all, because that's what I worry about. I have zero interest, and I don't know what the rumor was about anything, and I will only speak for me, but I bet you everyone will agree, no one wants to cut the transfer. There wouldn't be a cut. I don't think that it serves us well. I think the divisiveness is very painful, and the effects last a very long time. So that's not what I would want to do. I would want you to figure out if you could tighten. I'm surprised you have, when Ryan said you don't have you're anticipating a deficit, because I was, like with Rory, I thought that there was, I probably want to go back and watch the tape, because there was some conversation about the fund balance and the using of it, and so I'm kind of confused there as well. It's not a question, it's sort of a
That was from last year's budget cycle.
All right, that's a good point. I want to turn to the current fiscal year anticipated deficit of about $1.5 million.
Yeah.
So about 13 months ago, school committee passed a budget that was balanced. It included about a 400-plus appropriation from the general fund balance to sort of plug a hole there. Town council passed the final budget, which included the school committee's balanced budget about 10 months ago. Here we are now, anticipated $1.5 million deficit. What happened?
Great question. So just to clarify, the only way, accounting-wise, to access your fund balance is to overspend. Right? So you need your expenditures to exceed your revenue source so that it flows to the income statement, and then you can access that fund balance when it comes down. So essentially, by sending $1.1 million out of our general fund into the capital fund, right, that's a deficit, so to speak, a budgeted deficit from the general fund, because it's coming from the general fund to the capital fund with no external revenue source, so to speak. On the operations side, so the General Assembly passed their budget in June of last year, and they increased the employee retirement system rates, the local contribution rates that we're required to contribute into that system. It was higher than our budgeted amount. So we ran that through our covered payroll. It was a $400,000 hit to the general fund. So we had essentially two options. The first option was to just use fund balance, or to come back to the town and ask for more money. The committee opted to use fund balance. So essentially that's the deficit, so to speak, for next year.
So that $1.1 million of capital that you took from the general fund and appropriated, That's not included in the operating budget. First year of capital typically is, right? So, I guess what I'm trying to clarify is, you passed the budget, operating budget that was balanced. That included or excluded the 1.1 of capital?
That included that.
Okay, so how do we get to this $1.5 million deficit?
The $1.1 million going to capital and the $427 going to operations. That will hit the general fund balance.
Yeah, but if a balanced budget includes a $1.1 million appropriation of capital, then that shouldn't contribute to a deficit.
The point is, we don't have an external revenue source on the revenue side, so we are budgeting to overspend your revenues, which is how you access that fund balance and get it to come down.
So I see it as based on what you're explaining to me, I see it as just a transfer from the general fund to capital, and really a budget deficit of about $400K.
Fair enough. So I should have been a little more specific with my terms. I agree with that.
Is that a correct statement?
Yeah, absolutely.
Expenditures in excess of revenues, about $400K. That's the anticipated deficit for the current year.
Yeah.
Ended June 30.
Totally fair. Yep, I agree with that.
Okay.
Yep, definitely.
And that 400 you're attributing to the change in the
The change
legislation.
in the legislation passed in June. So we had already passed our budget, and we had to revise it after the state passed their budget. Yep.
Can I ask a question about the field maintenance? Because that's one of the topics. So that's to just set up Old Mountain Field, right? Or to like mow or pave
I
the
don't know if
lines?
it's Old Mountain. My understanding is the Curtis Corner athletic fields and Hazard Field at the high school, I believe. There
Right.
may be some other, I don't have an itemized list, but
Right.
that's my understanding of
So,
what that
so
is.
the Parks and Rec staff
Correct,
do that,
correct.
right? But your school students use that space, right?
Correct, and
And-
they are open to the public, but you're right, primarily students,
But
athletes.
I do think we had a conversation in the budget meetings about Old Mountain Field, did we not? About, with Jim, maybe, we talked about right, they don't pay, they use it at no charge, right? Correct?
I'm sorry, repeat that,
You use Old Mountain Field and all those other spaces, right? That's a town parks property and you use it for the baseball, right? Right?
yes, our athletic director said yes, confirmed.
I just feel like we do maintenance that those students use too. So I'm just confused on why you want to hand it back.
Oh, it's a great question. Essentially, like we said, these are town employees. We didn't have an itemized list. We weren't sure exactly if we're getting 96,000 in service, so perhaps the number is negotiable, that we don't have to give all of it back. There may even be an appetite, please don't be angry with me, for increasing that number if we do receive more service from the town. I don't think that's unreasonable either. I'm just saying, that was the logic.
But the 96,000 figure that you've got here on slide 7, that's based essentially on billing that you get from the town.
Correct.
We bill you and then.
Correct. Yep.
But you use other fields. It really covers all the fields that you use for your students, right? When soccer practices at Tuckertown, Terry's maintaining that. We're using Old Mountain Field, somebody's maintaining that. You're practicing your blue stuff.
Absolutely. The soccer would be using certain fields, community groups that come in. Similarly, SROs when directing traffic, pertain to all public safety. There are crossing guards help, not just students or school-age students. They help anyone who would need going across the street. So ultimately, that public safety aspect, though targeting those who are engaged in school activities at that time, those individuals are not precluded from their other public service and public safety and helping the general community at large. Just like when practice is over and we'll be at the new, once we have those new fields and complex, we'll be open to those who want to walk the track when the track meet is over, or take or use the tennis courts for pickleball, even though there's no interscholastic league for tennis. Again, it's that collaboration of ultimately the community benefiting from increased physical activity, yes, targeted towards the town side, and then occasionally, sometimes the town side being used for the school, but working in conjunction, but that our athletic director and facilities director work through collaboration and work together with those individuals who take care of those things, but when it comes down to it, they do not have oversight and cannot direct them to say the school has priority. no, you will not report, no, you will not report to that car accident, you will not report to the walkie-talkie because you're assigned here to the school. We don't have oversight. No, don't line Old Mountain Fields first, line our field. That happens, but that happens through dialogue. And so again, it was that ultimately of where does supervision, bargaining units, where does it lie? Again, trying to think of all options.
I don't see the logic of shifting it. I see the logic of like increased collaboration, and that if you're not happy with what it is, we can do better.
Certainly not. It is certainly not indicative of any desire to cut, of not being happy. It was a matter of we cannot find that much in cuts without dramatically impacting the educational program that is currently offered in South Kingstown Public Schools. If I need to find $800,000, I am nowhere close to this school year next year. And it is an attempt to make sure that those services that people not only expect and deserve can continue without interruption. And this is an attempted creative way to get there, albeit on the school side of the ledger.
Thank you. I know, I'm sure, because it's not a fun topic to be like, you can take the field maintenance back, because clearly that's 100% benefiting.
We need these.
Right?
We need these. We are not cutting athletics. We are not recommending cutting school resources, school resource officers, the safety, engagement, future focus. I'm not going to start cutting at safety.
Right. So I think what's hard for people who pay attention to the school budget and the town budget is to hear this meeting happen and everyone is worried, and then all the programs, you put up this really horrible list and people get very upset, understandably so. But then in the summer or at some point, there's a surplus. So it's hard for people to hear the drama and put people through that angst. We already have way more federal people doing that on a daily basis. I don't like doing it at all. So and then in June to be like, we had $1.2 million, or it was exactly what the painful referendum was what you found. So that's hard for a whole group of people to hear.
Absolutely.
And so that is where we are then responsible to be like, yeah, they found the money. And it sounds, we put people through a lot of pain in May, in June, and even now. And so that part I don't want.
Absolutely.
I don't know how to.
And I don't know how to guarantee it to you other than saying, it's not please acknowledge, but it's a matter of we're not leading with that. I'm not leading with athletics. We're not leading with special education. We're not leading with the arts. I'm not leading this budget recommendation with the things that are on the table. We're leading with things, yes, valuable people, however, declines in enrollment, duplication of services, and then, as well as then examining the BEP. And so there might be duplications of certain programs because there are two offerings, but those two offerings are extremely valuable to the town. I'm putting those out there as that is the third tier of buckets that we are legislatively required to look at.
Right.
And as such, I'm trying to avoid that at all costs. And, there is a dueling piece here in that, we want to strive for that surplus. We're going to try and be efficient. We're going to look for breakage. So, while it's looking like we are going to be indefinitely not have a large surplus, I certainly don't want to cause consternation and lose credibility amongst folks by saying, yep, 800,000 to your point, to then come back and be like, yeah, there was 1.2.
Right. So that
But
leads
we don't
me,
know that until we get audited.
So that leads me perfectly to where this is my third term. So back in 2020, when we level funded the schools, we sort of made this agreement, we can level fund you and you can come back and ask for more money. Because actually, what you know now in March, you're gonna know more information in June and September. So it's almost as if, I'm totally fine with that. Like, if you came back in September and like, this was an unexpected expense, I'm not gonna deny that. But to increase the maintenance effort now with so many unknowns for the next 6 months, and it's likely, I'm sort of a realist. It's likely that you're going to have some surplus, and so that this pain we're doing now in shifting all the money just to raise the maintenance of efforts doesn't make sense to me. I would rather go back to the level funding and then come back quarterly and say I need this or that. So that's kind of, because I feel like we've done that for 6 years now.
Sure, and I want to acknowledge that, again, we've been able to do that by closing schools, by finding efficiencies, and again, ultimately, right now, we are past that, and so also the thinking being that as those bonds come on up, is that ultimately that 4% cap also outside of a referendum is not going to change. So in terms of our ability or the percentage that we would be able to not only ask for but potentially get is also then going to be smaller. So while inflation continues to happen and contractual obligations continue to go on, ultimately what 4% is of, or what 4% gets you, our ability to get a percentage of that 4% dramatically decreases in time, whereas right now we are not up against that. But again, that is strictly the purview, and obviously since we do not have the power to tax or to charge fees or to do those things, we're beholden to you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good.
So I just want to correct Deb on one thing. We don't always have a surplus. In the last 7 years, 4 years have been a deficit and 3 a surplus. That's what you expect with a budget. Sometimes you're over, sometimes you're under. We use fund balance when we have a deficit. Over 700,000 one year was a deficit, but we had fund balance. So, I mean, it's not like we're suddenly always in this surplus situation. Not on our side.
When we met in January, Carol, you actually talked about the same subject and the difference between fund balance and a surplus and fund balance and a deficit. If you could take 2 minutes and do it again, I know you don't have it written out, but I think that's part of the problem here is that people hear fund balance but process it as surplus.
It's the same thing when people hear the federal deficit versus the federal debt. One is a year to year, which is the surplus. It's a 1 year, do you end above budget or below budget? Or actually, as your revenue is greater than your expenses, you have a surplus. You have less revenue than your expenses, you have a deficit. The accumulation year over year is either your fund balance, because, and we don't have a national, we can't have debt, so it's just the year over year. And so surpluses are good because it builds your fund balance for those years where you have a shock, where you can just start with a budget that's balanced. The only reason you end up in a deficit position is because you have something that you didn't put in your budget. And in the last case, it was $400,000 that the state was charging us that we didn't even know about till June. So that's why when you get down to $900,000 in fund balance is worrisome, because we've had to take $1 million out of our fund balance 1 year, but we do it because we have no other place, no other revenue source, and it gets a little anxiety-ridden when your fund balance falls really low. But Ryan did a great job. I asked him to make two slides to try not to confuse people on what is a surplus and what is fund balance.
That would be slide 26, I believe.
And just say two things. One, the field maintenance should reduce a little bit because Hazard Field won't exist pretty soon, at least for a couple years. So it'll be back, but we want it to maintain it pretty soon. And my concern about Ms. Bergner's approach is we have to enter our fiscal year with the budget that we have. So we would have to assume that that's how much we have. We would have to eliminate positions or make the cuts going into that year, assuming that that's all we're going to get. And we have to notify people. It's mostly people, right, who have to be eliminated, and we have notification requirements for them that happen on the schedule that are contractual and state law. So if you tell us this is how much you have, we have to assume that you're not going to give us more, and we have to enter the year assuming we're not getting more. If you give us more, I guess we could call those people back, but that creates a whole other, what you talk about trying to avoid, this consternation of people, this upset about, we're canceling things, we're bringing them back, and it would cause that sort of, because that's just not the way municipal budgets work. Like my personal budget, if I have a little more money, I'll buy a little more of something. We can't run the school department that way. We have to assume you're not giving us more.
But that was really what was the verbal sort of conversation between the council and the school committee in that year.
Yeah, I wasn't here for that.
I know.
I would have said the same thing.
I understand what you're saying.
I think it's
but you have-
problematic.
Right. If it's a level fund, then you're going to make a set of choices, right? And that in June, if we said we're in a different spot, we need X, we could still, it's still possible.
Right, but those decisions will have been made by June. Those layoff notices will have gone out. Those cuts will have been made. That it will be done, and by June, you're saying in June we can come back and say, well, actually we had a deficit. Give us some more money. You give us more money, and maybe we can bring those programs back. And meanwhile, are we starting the school year with or without some of those programs?
As well as we then see that potential, people change their mind and then accept CTE or go off to additional charter schools in which we can't recoup those costs, which then we need to come back and say, we're losing more. I would hate to then come back to you that way. Additionally, when we do, I believe it's June 30th, we have the contractual obligation in Rhode Island state law to notify due to fiscal exigency. It's March 1st due to performance, and but then we also begin to incur at that point also unemployment as well. And while we could recall, we might be losing those people to other districts with the teaching shortage.
Thank you. Thank you, Brad, too.
Mr. President, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jim. There were 2 points I just want to make. So as you're evaluating the request, you have a fiscal impact, so you know what the end game would be. So the first point I make is, if you went with the $309,000 on the shared services alone, the tax levy would increase to 3.87%, from 3.37 to 3.87 on that alone. If you combine, so it's a total expense of $809,000. So if you included the $500,000 that the school department is requesting by the tax levy and the $309,000, the tax levy would go up 4.42%. Total. The second point I wanted to make, Councilwoman Alley made a point, is looking at the shared services, and it appears that it's targeted towards the schools. It's not. This is the fiscal model that Steve Alford used, and he used it very well for 42 years, was that everything was apportioned, everything was shared, every position just about, including mine and Brian's. So everyone that utilizes one of the services or one of the positions gets charged back that in their budget, not just lights and assets and so forth, but the positions themselves. So it's not like that was made to target the schools. That's the fiscal model he used for over 40 years, and that's where it came from. And it's still in existence today, especially the enterprise funds.
Which is exactly what I wanted to talk about. Is that okay with everybody? Okay. So here's what I'm concerned about. We have federal reimbursement. The enterprise fund is regarding school meals. It's page 23. And so in the budget, we have $330,000 expected from federal reimbursements. Whereas we see this week that the current administration has canceled $1 billion in local food purchasing for schools and food banks. This is the Farm to School program, We also hear of wide cuts in SNAP benefits. So for me, the things that keep me up at night are worrying about kids going hungry. And so my concern is that if we don't get the $330,000 in federal reimbursement dollars, that we are gonna, and of course, we absolutely, feeding children is very important. I mean, you know, tops on the list. So I just feel that we really need to take a real long, hard look at how we're spending our money, because it's very uncertain now, and we are charged, you know, I think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, because that's the way I think. So food and shelter and those sort of things are all the basis upon which our entire society is built. And if we lose all this funding, then it will be incumbent on each one of us to make sure that we maintain our ability to feed children. So for that reason, I feel, you know, really, you know, nervous considering a potential increase to the budget, because I feel we're just at the beginning of where things are going sideways here. So.
Paula, go ahead.
While I agree with some of the things you're saying, Ms. Allen, my concern is our potentially dismantling our public system here in South Kingstown. In my opinion, it's critical that we don't start talking about cutting programs. We're building a new school, we're trying to bring kids back to our district so that we're not spending millions of dollars to go out. If we can't get this money from you now and we have to come and ask for more, what's going to happen in that little time span? People are going to take their kids elsewhere, just like they have been. And then what? We already don't have enough money to do what we need to do, the current stuff that we're doing right now. And if we can't be assured that we have that money, assure our families that we have that money to keep the programs that are critical for their students' style of learning, that is when we're going to have big problems. Because South Kingstown will not have a public school system because we dismantled it. Because we want to continue to level fund. We can't keep doing that. I said this back, I think, 2 budget seasons ago. Okay, it's okay to level fund us now, but eventually you're not going to be able to do that. We're going to have to keep up with the times, and everything is inflating. And yes, I totally agree about what's happening, but I'm not in fear of that. I'm not going to allow that to put a fear in me that says, oh no, we're not going to do that because it's uncertainty. We live in uncertainty every day. But today, we have an obligation, and the obligation has always been to put the students first for us. And so that's why we're here. We're here because we need to see an increase in our budgets, because we want to assure that we're going to be able to keep these programs that are potentially on a chopping block, right? Not to mention our educators, not to mention those great teachers that we have that may have to get their job yanked out from them and may not be able to be called back because the town wants to level fund us again. That's not fair.
couple of things. A couple of years ago, we were accused incorrectly of finding, I don't know, the number changed from minute to minute, 1.5 million, 2 million, because someone outside of this body, outside of our administrative staff, looked at not our annual budget, which is what we have in front of us tonight, but they looked at the monthly report that our CFO is required to present to the school committee. Mr. Kilpatrick does that now and gives us a monthly report. So just to put it in individual perspective, if you looked at my budget now, one of my accounts has a whole lot of money in it, but that doesn't mean I have $10,000 extra hanging around over and above what I need to pay, because that money is to pay my taxes. And that's the same thing with the school department. The money is sitting there because in March, today, because there are bills that we have to pay in April and May. Those come out of this fiscal year's budget. The other thing I want to point out is we have been level funded for 5 years, and we've done a damn good job educating our kids. We have absolutely phenomenal educators in our district. And yes, we have a lot of top step teachers. Why? Because they come here, some of them came here from the district I used to teach in, because it was better to teach here than to teach there. They come here and they stay. They're good educators. A lot of the people sitting at these tables here were educated by South Kingstown Schools. I'm one of them. A lot of people sitting out there were educated by South Kingstown Schools. The budget we have presented you with tonight, as Superintendent Pedraza and Mr. Kilpatrick presented, they started with last year's programs, last year's staffing, last year's everything, and brought it forward to the cost of 2025-26. And found that we would be $2.4 million short. We're not stupid. So they worked on this budget and managed to cut $1.5 million from the budget. And now we present you with, we would like our budget to be increased by $500,000. We did not add that $500 to add to the maintenance of effort, as you implied, Ms. Bergman. We said that yes, that $500 would, in an effort to be more transparent. The $500,000 will add to the maintenance of effort. The $309,830 will not add to the maintenance of effort. We did not add that $500 to the budget in an effort to increase the maintenance of effort. That is absolutely not there. I can go into any one of our elementary schools and walk into a second or third grade class. I can go to our middle school and go to any class, and I can get those kids to do this average for me. 5 years of level funding, divided by $100,000.
I do want to say, we get your perspective. The point of these meetings is to work collaboratively, understand your budget.
Divide the $500,000 by the 5
Before you go further, please allow us to get back to deliberating over the details of the budget. That's why we're here. We're here to collaborate with the school committee, understand your budget, your request. No decisions are made as to the appropriation tonight. We are working through this. Decisions will be made preliminarily on March 17th, this upcoming Monday. But I have several questions I haven't had answered yet. I'd like the opportunity to. So I get your perspective. I get your perspective.
I'm addressing comments that came from.
Would you like to hear our questions, the remaining council members up there, as it pertains to the school department's budget?
Yes, of course.
All right. Are there other questions? I have some I'd like to jump into.
I feel compelled to make a comment. I'm sitting up here. I didn't hear Ms. Bergner say that it was done deliberately to increase maintenance of effort.
Thank you.
So I have a few more questions I'd like to dive into here. So, out-of-district expenses, it's always something that we get killed on. Obviously, there's been a trajectory of an increase in the number of students that we see go out of district. We have to cover those costs. Now, it looks like you identified that the current year expense related to that is about $6.3 million. That's the current year we're in now. You project that the expense for that will be $7 million in this budget, which is the next current year. But you did mention it's your opinion that you think it's starting to peak, which would indicate to me that there would likely be a decline in the amount of students that elect to go out of district. So that to me is a good indication, allows for a freed up cash, a less expense in budgets every year thereafter, subsequent to the year that we're considering, which is the next fiscal year tonight. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, it's a great point. I would agree with you in principle. Essentially, the key factor here is the share rates. So the tuition rates go up every year that we have to pay out. So even at the same number of students next year, the cost will go up, essentially, because of those tuition rates, the local share rates and the tuition rates to the private schools for our special education students. But I would agree, if we do bring children back, we could potentially save a significant amount of money.
Which will be great for your budget going forward.
Absolutely.
And a question we talked about in the past, maybe it was last year, maybe it was in January, I'm not sure. We broke down what the difference is to educate a student who elects to go to a public school versus a student who elects to go out of district. Can you give us the breakdown? I don't know if you have that in front of you.
Could you rephrase your question or clarify what do you?
So there's a cost to educate a student that elects to go to the public schools. There's a cost to educate a student that elects to go out of district. We know that it costs more to educate a kid who decides to go out of district because we don't get as much housing aid reimbursement from the state. Can you talk about what that difference is?
Sure. So,
and that difference essentially makes up the expense here related to out of district, correct?
We'll take it one at a time. So the way that RIDE calculates the local share rates, the amount that we pay for an out-of-district, we'll start with out-of-district, is they take the property tax transfer divided by resident average daily membership as of June 30 of the previous fiscal year. That's the same across all the districts. So the numerator is always the property tax transfer, right? So there you go, there's that. Then they take a reduction for charter school students, which is this complex formula. I won't go into all the details, but they allow you to reduce that essentially. And then they add to that number for a CTE student. So the amounts are different. So the cost per pupil or the local share rate is about $21,000 or so. That's just the property tax transfer divided by resident average daily membership. The charter amount is $19,294 this year. The CTE amount is $21,203 per student. So those are the three different metrics. But for the most part, the cost to the taxpayers of South Kingstown to educate all of the students who reside in South Kingstown is the same. That baseline rate.
But this out-of-district expense, which is about 6.3 in the current year, right?
Rory, I think I know what you're getting at. So if we send a student out of district, we have to pay the transfer rate, which is $20,000. And if we get a new student in the district and we place them in our schools, that marginal cost for that additional student might just be a couple $1,000. The teacher's there, the building's there, the principal's there. To educate one more student is very small. But if we lose just one student to a charter school or a CTE, it's extremely expensive because they have you pay that transfer amount.
And that's what makes up the large expense that we're seeing in the budget.
Yes, and we don't save that. We save the $2,000, but we send $20,000.
Okay.
We don't benefit from the economy of scale.
Can I explain this as someone who failed freshman college math? So you have 20 students in a classroom with one teacher, and let's say each student costs $20,000. It's a $400,000 classroom, and that $400,000 is paying for the teacher, maybe a TA, maybe the reading specialist, math specialist, piece of the music teacher and art teacher and principal and the maintenance and the lights and the gas and everything, all the way up to the superintendent's salary, right? So that's $400,000 paid for those 20 students. Two of those students go to a charter school. We now pay their tuition at the charter school, which is $40,000. We have 18 kids in the classroom. The cost of that classroom is still $400,000. right? We haven't saved anything. The cost of the 20 kids in total, 18 in the classroom, 2 in a charter school, is $440,000. So now you multiply that, so we have a 10% increase in our expenses when those 2 kids go to charter school. So you multiply that by how many hundreds of kids are doing that.
Just to clarify, that numerator never includes out-of-district tuition expenses.
Remember, failed college
that's all
freshman
right.
right? So you multiply that by a couple hundred, and that's how we get to that $7 million.
Okay. I want to move on to something else now. Transportation expense. It's always a large expense. We're a very large town, so just to bus everyone to each school costs a lot. It's always been a big expense in our budget. It's somewhere that we're not getting a lot of state aid to help us reimburse our expenses for. You did say earlier in the presentation that any amounts we get in aid from the state is not included as a revenue line item. It's actually a credit against our expense.
Correct.
So we're just showing the net expense on our budget.
Yes.
Can you show us where that is, sir?
Sure. Slide 19, yeah, okay. Looking at the 55,000 series, other purchase services, so it's buried in there, but that's essentially where it is. So what I've done is I've taken that non-public transportation offset, and I've subtracted it out of our total projected expense for transportation. It's in that series.
So can you tell us what that net amount is for proposed budget, and maybe a comparison as to the adopted 24-25, just so we can get a sense? Are we seeing an increase in the net amount of the expense there, or fairly flat? Go ahead.
Great question. Yep. So current year expense, $5.7 million in transportation. Next year projected at 5.3, so $5,378,000 against $5,737,000. So an actual decrease. And my philosophy was I took the actual projected expense for fiscal 25 and escalated that at the 4% contractual amount as opposed to escalating the budgeted amount, because we budgeted for an additional bus we anticipated through statewide transportation that didn't materialize. So that ended up being an overestimate. So I didn't want to overestimate on the overestimate, so to speak.
So how are we seeing a decrease here?
So I removed that bus, essentially, right? And then
and that's in your adopted current year, which is why the current is higher than whatever the proposed is?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep, correct.
Good. Go ahead, you want to jump in on that?
I just was wondering, Mr. President, it's 9 o'clock right now, and we have a full house of educators. I may have to go teach tomorrow, and I didn't know if you want to consider moving public comment up or not.
I agree. You know, it's just that we vote on the preliminary budget on March 17th. I just have, a few more questions I want to get out there. I think it's important while we have you here. If you're not here when we vote on the preliminary budget, it's difficult to make a determination. Another thing I have here is respect to OPEB. Does this budget include a contribution to OPEB?
No, sir.
It does not. So that's fully covered by the town. So any contributions made to OPEB is made through the municipal budget, not through the school department's budget.
The school department has been allocating about $60,000 to contribute to the OPEB fund for the past few fiscal years. That's my understanding.
Can you say that again?
Yep, the school department has been appropriating $60,000, $60,688 roughly.
600-ish?
60,000, 60. Yep.
Okay.
That was our contribution budgeted for last year and this year. However, we're not budgeting a contribution for next year.
Okay.
How is that 60,000 calculated?
That's a great question. It's simply, the fund is super funded, which is my understanding, and so we're just carried it forward.
That's
right.
I'm asking the question.
So, good point. Other post-employment benefits is the acronym. So that is for healthcare benefits and retirement for current and future employees in both the town and the school department. The town has a trust fund, OPEB trust, that's administered through the Rhode Island Interlocal Trust. That is for both the town and school department. Presently, both the town and the school, in the current budgets, as Ryan mentioned, within their current budget, they budget $60,000 for OPEB. Within our current budget, we have two different lines. We have a $90,000, and then we have a I forget what that's labeled as, but we have about $105,000 put aside for OPEB. Beyond those items, both the town and the school budget currently pay-as-you-go for retiree benefits. So the town, within its operating budget, pays for its current retiree expenses for healthcare. It does not draw those funds out of the trust. So that's, and the school department operates in a similar manner, where their current retiree benefits are paid out of their operating budget, in addition to their OPEB contribution.
Do the amounts paid out as retirement benefits exceed the amount that we contribute each year toward the fund? Do you know that answer?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Do the amounts that we pay in expenses sort of withdraw from the fund to pay retirement benefits, do they exceed the amounts that we contribute toward the fund every year?
Are you speaking to the OPEB fund?
Yes.
We don't draw funds out of that. We haven't drawn any retiree benefits right now are paid out of the operating budgets of both the
So,
town
okay,
and
the
the school.
question is, the amounts that you pay out of the operating budget, does that exceed the amounts you contribute toward OPEB?
We're, right now, as I think Ryan alluded to there, we're super funded. We're funded currently at 150%. And by paying our pay-go, by paying our current retiree benefits out of our operating budgets, both the town and school, that's alleviating expenses that would be coming out of the OPEB fund. So it operates in a similar manner. Those paying it out of the operating budget acts as a contribution to that fund because we're not drawing those benefits out.
I see. Good.
Ryan, you mentioned earlier the state legislation that changed the contribution. Was that related to OPEB?
It was not. It was specifically the employee retirement system and the municipal employee retirement system, so the pension, state pension system.
And this is just
nothing
just
specific.
benefits.
Correct.
Okay. Thanks.
This is a new topic. One of the slides you presented on, you said there were several bills in the General Assembly. Is there any hope on the horizon that any of these bills would come forward to help us? You mentioned transportation for private schools. Is there any other? And is that worth trying to have people advocate to pass that? Or are there other things that we should be advocating for?
I would say yes. However, in terms of making sure I knew the stage of which the bill was in, if it were in committee or bill numbers, I don't have, in front of me, but I do know, and also I believe that the Senate is backed up a little bit more than the House currently, at least in terms of the last Superintendent's Association meeting that we've had in the brief. However, that there is, people can see the logic of why are we supplementing the transportation of $40,000 a year private school tuitions with local transportation budgets. So, while there are things out there that are in, I can't speak to where they are in the committee and the likelihood at this point.
Can I speak to that? I've reached out to Representative McEntee and Fogarty, actually Tansey and Senator Sosnowski as well, and I'm trying to coordinate sitting down, having conversations with them. I was talking with Ms. McEntee on Tuesday, to just try to start, how do we advocate? How do we advocate? How do you advocate? How do they advocate? How do we really, I know it's been done in the past with no movement, but we need to start pushing harder, not just for transportation, but there's multiple unfunded mandates. And we're not the only school department who's navigating that, so if we can kind of find a way to mobilize and forge ahead with that.
It would be helpful if we not only told people what bills to advocate to, like in your newsletters, like Advocacy Corner or whatever, because I think we're missing out on money and opportunities, because even with transportation, that's a bear. It's unfair to us. I know that. I just didn't know if there were any opportunities that we could be supportive in the legislature too, if you knew that. Because you mentioned, how much is the public transportation cost?
So that's going to vary. It's
private.
going to vary by district. The other major driver, and that is being taken up at the level right now, is in terms of transportation zones for CTE students.
Yeah.
So by decreasing the size of those zones, making it so that we don't have to, making the zones smaller, in which we would, not that students still couldn't go there to other CTE programs, but that we would be able to mitigate those, we wouldn't have to pay for that transportation.
Yeah.
So it's something that I would need to look into.
So the CTE is just the whole state and catchment areas?
No, right now, there are existing zones, but for example, I believe the Barrington zone goes all the way to Providence. But Cranston wouldn't go to Providence. So they, in terms of each municipality has a different problem with their zones. So currently, as of right now, I believe our zones would be, Cherokee, Narragansett, North Kingstown, and then anything outside of that, Exeter, West Greenwich. Anything outside of those zones, students could still apply, and they could be accepted, and we could go, but transportation would not be funded into that part. So there's talk of making those zones at the very least smaller for transportation purposes. I think we should go a heck of a lot more, where we should be able to say, why are we paying to send South Kingstown taxpayer dollars to potentially schools and or districts that are not ranked or are by our State Department of Education to go from pay to go to a CTE program that's maybe a 2-star school when we have 3 and 4, potentially soon to be 5.
Yep.
And that taxpayer dollars so that we can go from a proficiency rate in mathematics that is, around 50% to one that's never achieved greater than 17. So I think that, again, a longer-term plan, obviously, if we're still talking about transportation of private school students, but in terms of the ultimate use of taxpayer dollars and where it's going to at the state level, there's lots of work to be done.
Is there a transportation bill? Is there anything changing in the transportation funding formula? Is that
the only thing I could find on the current legislation that's being heard this week has to do with how you classify something that's a school bus, right? A smaller vehicle. Nothing to do with money coming back to the community or including transportation in the funding formula.
So one of the things that I really would like to get a better handle on, and I've talked about it with Carol a little bit today, is sometimes I've heard accounts of students leaving our school system and saying that they're going to a particular CTE program, but the real thing is the sports teams. And so that student may not have any interest in the CTE, but they want to play on the team. So we need to have a way to prevent that, or that's not what taxpayers should be paying for. If a student does that, I know that there's challenges. Is there any way to prevent that or somehow get the student back?
So currently, in terms of state law and reporting metrics about the progress of students that we are paying for, there is nothing in place. So whether they are accumulating credits and on track to graduate, that is not reported to us unless that student comes back to us with credits or without. In terms of athletic participation, ultimately the interscholastic, that is something that one could argue that the Interscholastic League could take up, because ultimately they're not a public entity and they do make the rules, and that we all agreed to join in under the Principals Committee of Athletics that then makes the rules and regulations. And I know that there has been very, very preliminary discussion in terms of what would the impact be, and each community would be different, if you made a rule that said, okay, you can go to the CTE, but you must play for your home district. And so those are conversations. Well, the logistics of, I'm over here, practice starts, am I going to have to end early? So there are conversations, but right now, in terms of a legislative ability to do that, because it is not an organization that's overseen by the Department of Education, and it's something that is voluntarily entered into the Interscholastic League, there's nothing in terms of legislation that way. There are conversations amongst superintendents who are now all feeling the pain, even those that have taken for a while. Oh, now I'm going to lose some other folks. Oh, now they're going to be coming back. Oh, you're building a new school. I'm not. I couldn't get that passed. You guys are. What's going to happen to ours? Uh-oh.
So, in the absence of any direction from RIDE or the state or the federal government, is that a policy that the superintendent of South Kingstown could make or is that a policy that?
No, we could, the closest thing that we could get into would be regionalization partnership agreements. However, it definitely involve legal counsel as well as, again, I don't want to overstep in terms of over-promising.
Right.
However, but each school district does set caps and has their own rules and regulations regarding CTE admissions, and that varies. Ultimately, there should be more oversight and universal rules across the state.
I would like to see us pursue that and, in any way that we possibly can, whether we talk to our lawmakers and see if we could bring that to fruition, because it's hurting all of us.
It would also maybe be helpful if we got like a resolution regarding the transportation funding formula, and we passed it, and then we put it, if you write one and we do the companion, and then we put it in the newspaper, and then we tell 30,000 residents, start dialing. We should really try, because this is really.
Councilwoman, so there is a statewide commission, a special commission that was run by the General Assembly that is considering plans to eliminate public funding for private school transportation. People like Mayor Bob.
So, just point of order.
Please.
It's about the transportation costs that's not in the funding formula, which is $6 million for public transportation, the regular buses that what? For the public schools.
You mean in district or out of district? In district.
In
Is that what you're
district.
saying?
It's like $5 million, $6 million? Right. That's the part that we should organize on if you draft, we're not here to talk about it, but if you draft a resolution and then we do the companion and we send it to the legislator and we get Bill Seymour to write an article and then we get 30,000 people to start calling, I think I'd rather spend 15 minutes of time and everyone can get $5 million or half of that back. It's hard to make that money back. We're fighting about. Correct. So I think this is the year that we really do that as well.
All right, one last question on transportation. Absent any legislation that increases reimbursement for transportation, do we anticipate that expense is going to continue to go up? I know when we look at the budget, the proposed budget, we see a decrease as compared to the current year adopted. Where do we see that in the subsequent budgets?
That's a great question. So we're entering our last year of our contract with Ocean State Transit, and so next year we'll have to recompete. We had a meeting with Ocean State Transit the other day. They said to expect cost increases of between 12 and 15%.
Okay. All right.
Do we still have a plan to sort of make the buses more full?
So one other piece that might also that we hope to realize tax savings in terms of transportation. This is year one. We went from a 3-tier busing system down to 2, so our middle and high school students now share a bus. This again is the first year of that, so we don't know because it's just a singular data point, but we hope to continue to realize savings from that moving forward. Additionally, if enrollment goes down, it continues to decline. Obviously, things go proportionally with that.
All right, thank you. All right, we've had a lot of good discussion.
All right, can I just
Yeah,
speak?
go ahead.
I just want to piggyback on something Paula started with, but it's a perfect opportunity with what Mr. Pedraza just said. One of our biggest drivers of the issues we're facing is the out-of-district tuition with CTE, along with transportation, right? We're building this beautiful new high school. It's happening. It's super exciting. Cannot wait. Many of us have been in it for a long time, and we're making incredible progress. That said, if we, and I say we collectively, this community does not show our students' families that we are investing in our programs in that beautiful school, the children will continue to leave, and that number will continue to increase. If we, to your point, if we can reclaim 10 students, if 30 less students, when they're transitioning from grade 8 to grade 9, say, we're staying here, and that number drops from, I don't recall what it is right now, like 95 down to 65, that's millions of dollars that we don't have to come to you and say, hey, we need $500,000 this year. Because if we have to make cuts, we're already making huge cuts coming into this. With that $500,000/$800,000, we'd have to make more. And if we have to keep doing that this year, what's going to happen, to your point, next year when the bond money starts building up? Are we going to just be held hostage with 0% increase for the next 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years? Like, that's what it feels like. But our students are going to continue to leave because we're not investing in the program that's in the beautiful building. And we're not the only school district who's investing in a beautiful building right now. So it's kind of like a last moment plea, piggybacking on what Mr. Pedraza just said and what Paul said earlier. The kids will continue to leave, and that other purchase services number will continue to skyrocket. And then where are we? We have a beautiful building in Hazard Field, and our students are going elsewhere. So that's kind of where I've settled in at. Like we're going to have to keep asking, because we can't keep maintaining 0% increase year over year and maintain the programs that are going to increase our scores and increase our graduation rates. So, thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to add just one thing to what Kate said. The more students that leave our district, that means the lower students, but as we've explained, we send a lot of money and we save very little. That makes the per pupil cost go up, which means the transfer rate goes up. So it's very cyclical. The more it happens, the more expensive it is, the more money we lose. And if it happens again, it's even more expensive and more money is lost. And so it's imperative that we keep the programs that we have. And oh my gosh, we have such amazing teachers, staff, kids. I mean, they're doing magnificent things in our school. But if we don't make this investment, we will hemorrhage funds. That this investment, and it's minimal, we've cut 1.6. We came to you with a minimal ask. But it's imperative that we don't have to cut programs, because that's what we're going to have to do. If we have to make further cuts, it will impact the programs in our schools.
I just want to say one last thing before we switch over to public comments. I want to remind you that the dismantling of our public system here in South Kingstown does not affect all students. It affects our low income, and it affects our students of color, coming from all demographics. And yes, we have some concerns coming from the higher-ups, but what's happening, and what I see is that they want to let the states decide what happens with their schools. And then the states are going to let the towns decide what happens with their schools. We don't want South Kingstown to be the first school district to dismantle, because they said, get rid of the Department of Education. Because they said, let the state take care. Then the state said, let the town. And if that happens, we're going to have to do what we're going to do anyway, if we want to keep our public schools open because, again, it doesn't affect all of our students. Some people are fortunate enough to be able, as they are doing right now, to send their schools to charter private. Private, they're paying for it, but they also are relying on our tax dollars to send their children to other programs like CTE, charter schools. And the other thing is if we dismantle our public system here, and other districts still have this, we're gonna have to pay to send those low income and students of color elsewhere. Why do we want to do that? We don't.
Thank you, Paula. All right, we've had a lot of good discussion. I think we've got a good grasp on understanding the details of this budget, which is great. It's always a pleasure to work with you guys. We want to work collaboratively. We care about the schools. The schools is always a priority. High school project is number one on our priorities. We always want to make sure there's adequate resources for the teachers to teach the students. It's always number one. With all that said, now we have a public comment section. I know there's some teachers out there, so shout out to you guys. Thank you for your service. I was one of the students of SK, Peacedale, Broad Rock, SK High, and I always say it did wonders for me, a product of the system. I owe a lot to all of you. But now we're at the public comment section. If anyone wants to speak on what we've talked about tonight, I invite you to come on up. There's a lot of people here tonight, so I ask try to be concise, think about what you want to say. We're going to limit you to 3 minutes to try to accommodate everyone. If you have questions, we'll try to entertain those. And with that said, first come, first serve, we just ask you identify yourself. Yep.
All right, good evening. Brian Nelson and
Bridget Gonzalez.
Yep, and we're the co-presidents of NEA SK. So, good evening, members of the Town Council and School Committee. When you campaigned, many of you pledged to support public education. Strong public schools are the cornerstone of a thriving community, but words alone are not enough. True support requires action, ensuring our schools have the resources to educate and inspire every student in SK. Public education is under attack nationwide. With efforts to defund and destabilize schools, At a time of unprecedented challenges, it's critical for South Kingstown to stand strong and defend our schools. Our community has already shown its strong support for public education. Just recently, residents overwhelmingly defeated a referendum aimed at cutting the school budget. Additionally, voters passed a school project bond demonstrating their commitment to investing in the future of our schools. These actions prove that South Kingstown values its schools and understands the importance of funding education. Now it's time for this council to uphold that same commitment. The superintendent's proposed budget is not excessive. It is reasonable and reflects the real needs of our district. It is not just about numbers. It's about investing in our children, educators, and this community. By approving the superintendent's proposed budget, you show that South Kingstown values its schools and believes in its children. Our teachers and staff cannot do it alone. Now it is time to honor your commitment and lead by example. Thank you.
Thank you.
Better? Thank you. Hi, my name is Martha Bedigian. I live in town and currently in my last year working for South Kingstown Schools as an elementary librarian. I've learned it's considered best accounting practice to keep a certain percentage in reserve for unexpected expenses. I've witnessed many of these: sudden need for a roof, elevator for ADA compliance, floods, broken heating systems, broken AC, sometimes medically necessary. We never know what's coming around the corner, but it's usually expensive. Our buildings are old, they're perpetually in need of repair. If the school department were to try and finance our operating budget with reserves, we'd be in a bad spot should another unexpected emergency occur. And I've never seen a year that didn't have more than one in one form or another. It is upsetting to hear it suggested that schools should be level funded for the 6th straight year. Having been an elementary librarian in the district for 25 years, I can speak best to what 10 years of decreases in the funding formula, and then 5 years of level funding has meant for school libraries. We went from having assistance to losing assistance, having decent book budgets to having some years with none, and kids having library class every week to now every other week. A great loss, in my opinion. Next year, most likely one librarian will cover all 3 elementary schools. And that person will be very limited in terms of what we've been able to offer in the past. Knowing how challenging it is to cover 2 schools, I wouldn't fault any librarian that could not offer extra programs, such as our 4th grade Battle with Books, coding, when having to, things such as this, when having to cover 3 schools. You have to be there to collaborate with teachers on research projects or help kids find what they might want to read. I'd just like to say that certainly kids learn reading in the classroom, but libraries, this is why we want to read. This is where they learn how to be readers. As a retiree and SK taxpayer, of course, I'll always be concerned about taxes remaining affordable, but I'm equally concerned with my house retaining its value. Every dollar of investment in schools results in $20 increase in home values. Quality of schools is the #1 driver in the decision of families to move to our district. Continuing to level fund our schools without even adjusting for inflation, and we've had 7% inflation over the last 2 years, will continue to degrade what has always been a good school system. I'm proud of our town for, I'm proud of our town for voting down a number of proposals to cut our budgets, and in addition to voting for a new high school. But continually reducing the budget so that programs are lost, supplies are even tighter, fewer support staff, etc., it just doesn't seem consistent with a town council and a community which we know values education and supports schools. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Hello, I have learned so much tonight. I really appreciate having that opportunity, but it makes me feel very guilty about speaking to one program now. There must be many that fit the same pattern. It has come to my attention from the number of phone calls that have come in about this particular program, I'm not mentioning its name yet, that it will be part of that extra amount that the school committee is asking you to donate from the town. It will be cut. And this program has been in existence for 31 years. It has been started here. My family, when we moved here in 1972, carefully chose where we would live in Rhode Island by renting for a while and asking everybody their opinions. We chose South Kingstown to come here. Why? Well, I had a job nearby. That's a big thing. But the main reason we chose to live in South Kingstown was because of the reputation of the school system. We've been here for all the years. What's that, more than half a century? Our grandkids go to South Kingstown School. So this is a measure of why people come, why people stay, that I think you have to acknowledge. Sorry, I'm cutting this down from a whole big thing. Now, what I learned tonight was the extra expense, the enormous expense that goes to pay for students who bolt from the South Kingstown schools, go somewhere else because they can find better opportunities. And I'm talking about academic opportunities specifically. This program I'm talking about, or I'm referring to, is of the highest academic quality. It's inspiring, it's life redirecting to students, it's academically based entirely, and the students are, am I allowed to use the word diverse, of all sorts, who have an interest and will develop this interest in the academic areas of science, math, and things of that sort. I tell you, in my opinion, just my opinion, if we lose this program, because of that small amount that the school committee is asking for the guarantee it still exists, you're going to lose students of the highest quality. And not just one or two, but possibly many. This program has spread from South Kingstown, where it was originated. Now, vested interest here. My wife is the one who originated it and is in charge of it. But it has been adopted by so many school systems throughout the state because of its reputation. Superintendents are seeking, and principals are seeking to get into this program, and we're going to lose it because even if it magically reinstated the last minute, people, the citizens who have children in school will think, my kid's not going to be able to continue in this program, or my kid's not going to be able to enter this program when they get to the...
Sir, you are a bit over the 3. I just want to politely ask you to conclude it. Can you identify yourself?
Okay, and the program. You haven't said the program.
Well,
I believe the superintendent is refraining from identifying that
program. I wasn't going to say the program name, because I feel that there are probably several others in the same category in that small amount that the school committee is asking you. Commit to, let the people, let parents know that these things are going to continue, and don't lose this huge amount of money to these students going to the out-of-district schools.
What's your name? Thank you.
Larry Englander.
My name is Tim LaRose. I wrote everything down because I have a tendency to ramble. I'm doing that before I start reading, so I'm just going to read here. So identity, definition, the fact of being who or what a person or thing is. My interpretation of identity is based on what you excel at. You establish your excellence through goals and objectives. If our goal as a town is to have excellent school system, we need to determine what is necessary to achieve excellence. Excellence, however, comes at a cost. On Monday, the Town Council, based on your agenda, discussed goals and objectives for the 2024-2026 term. If the outcomes of those goals are similar to the objectives of past years, one of those goals would be for all South Kingstown schools to be 5-star rated. Based on RIDE criteria, 5-star is excellent. So you see the theme here, excellence. South Kingstown did not have any 5-star schools last year, so therefore we didn't meet our goal. This year's goal, this goal is not anecdotal. It was the first bullet in the 2020-2022 Town Council goals for the school system. The school budget has been level funded ever since that goal was established. If we establish goals to be excellent, but don't put a roadmap in place to achieve excellence, then why state that as a goal? A large part of a roadmap should not be comparing our prior year's performance where we did not meet our goals and proposing, if we do the same thing again, how much would it cost? And then reducing the available funds, even though everything costs more, and then expecting better results. I understand there are competing goals, being fiscally responsible at the sacrifice of being irresponsible of our other goals just makes it even more unlikely that we have a chance to achieve success. The gap in the budget should be, what will it take for our school system to achieve excellence? Not how can we repeat last year. The Town Council should be demanding that, and if it is not presented, then it should not be accepted. We voted for a new high school so that we could achieve excellence. We should continue to invest in our young people. If we don't, then I would say, at a minimum, our identity would be uncertain. I would propose that investing in excellence doesn't make us irresponsible. Superintendent Pedraza said in his message in the school budget, we don't have another school to close or a major program to cut that can make up this difference. The school system is at an inflection point. Cut to be fiscally responsible or invest to be excellent. Communities with excellent school systems thrive. I see this year's budget, specifically the school budget, as an opportunity to determine our identity as a town, as a family-first town with an excellent school system. If we continue to level fund or cut, unfortunately, we will not be able to claim an identity that correlates with an excellent school system. Propose a school budget that sets us on a path to be excellent. A status quo budget will not do that. Town council members, please.
Sir, you are a little bit over. I just want to politely ask you.
I got
to
like 3 sentences left.
Go ahead.
Town council members, please demand excellence, or at least know what it costs to set the school on a path to achieve excellence. School committee members and administration, propose a budget that sets us on a path to achieve excellence. Give us, voters and community members, the opportunity to choose excellence rather than just fiscal responsibility. We voted for a new high school to be excellent. Do the same with a budget. What is proposed and recommended for the budget, in my opinion, does not set us on a path to achieve excellence. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Dave Fiochetto. I'd first like to start with expressing my gratitude for the administration and the teachers for the excellent product that they're presenting. I was tasked today to come and ask one question. And during your presentation and deliberations, I heard a bunch of breadcrumbs that actually lead evidence towards the question. The question is, what is your contingency plan? And this refers to the uncertainty and risk at the federal level. There's a lot of uncertainty and risk at the federal level, and if I, going through the budget, identify about $2,615,000, which I learned that the trust fund, I guess, is probably the contingency plan. But I also learned today that it's probably only like $900,000, and also agree with that it should be probably larger. So the question I'd like to ask and hear you deliberate about, if you have time, would be, what is the contingency plan for this federal risk?
Mr. CFO, you can speak to that if you wish.
It's a great question. We have limited tools in our toolkit. Just the most immediate would be reserves, essentially. Second would be to come to the town council and ask for help. Other than that, we also could and would have to most likely look at further reductions of our budget across the board.
Yeah, I guess also that I learned here tonight was that it doesn't seem to be just your problem. It seems to be like a collective town budget problem, because you guys are talking about shuffling money from one pot to the other. So I don't know if there's a response for a contingency plan. I'm sure you have risks on the federal level also, but I don't know if you guys have.
I don't have a response to that.
The only thing I'd say is we just don't know at this point. We have commitments on different levels of funds. We have ARPA funds that have been committed. We think we're getting that. There are other things that come to the town as well. If we don't get them, we're going to have to reassess.
There's really not a strategic plan. I mean, we're all going through this in real time, and we all just have to evaluate things from, high up, looking at everything, and just do the best we can. That's all I can say.
I think our response to that is when we take up the preliminary budget on March 17th, that's something we can sort of deliberate in further detail. We don't have a direct response at this time. Good.
Hi. My name is Susanna Brewer. I'm a parent. I have a son in first grade at West Kingston. The committee's proposed budget has already cut 16.8 FTEs, and I think that none of them are directly at the elementary school level, but those cuts have affected the class sizes. They've affected next year's class sizes. There are only 2 first grade classes at West Kingston, and the class size is 23 and 22. They've cut the second grade class for next year, so those class sizes are going to remain. The teachers and staff are already struggling to support a class size of that. His class has at least 3 kids with behavioral needs, and there have been multiple incidents, and they don't have the wherewithal to handle those incidents and all the other kids, so no one is getting the support that they need. And if these kids aren't getting the support now in first grade, their growth and academic achievement is going to fail and fall, and then they won't be around to go to the brand new high school that we all want. So if we don't give the extra $800,000 that the school committee is asking for, that's going to have to come out of the fund balance and then we don't have the extra fund balance to handle if the federal budget gets cut, and Councilwoman Valley's concerns about kids who can't eat, we won't be able to cover that out of the fund balance either. So I just want to take that into consideration when we're talking about this.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Vera Levitt. I'm a parent of the 2 kids in this district, and we moved to our house where we live now because of the quality of the school. I work in Massachusetts. I was trying to pursue with my husband when I first moved to Massachusetts, and he said no way because this school district is the best. And this is how you get the people, and this is how you get the people not to leave, by cutting the budget that you are just paying. And it was really interesting to see the number, $20,000+ for the child that's leaving is not what you want to do. And I think the PR, like if you had like PR public relationship person, they would tell you, stop talking about budget cuts, start talking about what do you want to do. Change the whole conversation about this. What can we do for the district, and how can we make all of us look fabulous? So imagine those, newspaper titles. South Kingstown is pushing and trying hard to get new programs instead of cutting them. Every year is the same story. Like the school closed, so now my kids have to take a bus. I would love to walk to school. I can't. They didn't have a minute of Spanish entire time. I also would like to support the SMILE program because kids are part of it. It's amazing. Please don't cut the budget. Please see how could you change the perspective and say positive things about the programs and how we can actually expand them. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
But Harrington, don't worry, there won't be any clapping when I'm done. 27.5%, 72.5%. I'm amazed, and I've said it in the past, because I come to a lot of these meetings, I don't just come to one sporadic one. It's amazing that this entire town runs on 27.5%. That's the entire town, that benefits the entire town. I'm not against schools. I want good schools like everybody else. 72.5% of this budget is a lot of money, guys. We can look at different things, and when you guys are talking, you're bound to state requirements. We have to do this. The state says we have to do this. Your contractual requirements, it requires a percentage increase. When you talked about top teachers, well, it's nice to have a career with it. I know they can't retire at 55 anymore, but I guess they could have. I'll tell you one thing, I'm 62, and I couldn't have thought about retiring at 55. Having said that, with all of these tools in the toolbox for preventing, and I know they've made cuts, I'm not saying they haven't made cuts, we have to go a different route. I noticed on the agenda tonight, and I'm disappointed that, I had brought up, funding per student. Not surprised that was just thrown by the wayside. I wish assuming the people on private roads that were plowing that would have been thrown by the wayside by the council as well. What we need to look at is different ways to save the taxpayers' money. I was excited when I saw on here regionalization. I think it's time. We know the school department doesn't want it, but where does it save money? It's going to save money by reducing the redundancy of different departments, different administrators, this, that, and the other. Potentially, don't hold me to this, but I think it could save 25% to the taxpayers when South Kingstown and Narragansett would regionalize their schools. And that would, fill the schools, fill the high school, fill the other schools, and we work together as two towns together to get the best schools, the best programs, the best teachers, and having the top teachers, and again, costs a lot of money. So we got to try to look at something like, I understand what everybody's saying about, don't cut this program, that, and I get that. But you got to get the taxpayer side of it too, okay? If there's a way
that we can work together and get these towns collaborated and save us 25%, we need to do that. Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jessica Druday. I appreciated Councilwoman Alley and talking about the school lunch program because that's a very important program. On slide 23, I did have a question. Under, it said other purchased services, $740,000. I was wondering what the other was. Is that the above or is that different?
That is our contractual cost for our food service vendor. That's where that resides. That's that amount right there.
So that's how much, so
That's the expense.
the expense. So is that the above part brought down or is that
Nope,
separate?
it's separate. So up top is the revenue piece, below is the expenditure piece.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then, thank you so much for all the work. I know this was a lot. But to hear the school committee talk about the budget of $63 million, like we have a tin can out, it's like that's 72% of our taxes that's going to the schools. And we all want good schools. They voted for the school bond. And we understand that we're all in a hard time right now. So there are going to be cuts. And so when I see like other on the budget, I was just hoping that like it would be expanded so that we know what that other stands for, because that's our taxpayer money. So anywhere that
Just to clarify on that specific slide, that is financed by meal sales and federal reimbursements, not taxpayer dollars. The only time it would affect the taxpayers is if we ran a deficit and we would have to transfer funds from the general fund into this fund, potentially.
Okay. All right.
Just to clarify.
Thank you very much for that. I appreciate that. And then, so I just want to understand too, at the very beginning, when it says requesting additional $500,000, would that come out of our property taxes? Is that where they're looking for us to increase? Because we just increased the school bond, with the school bond, our taxes are going to be going up. And then, so that would be an addition too. So, as much as we care about programs, we also care about putting food on our own tables. So, when you're going through the budgets, please just think about the taxpayer and what we have to do to pay our taxes. You had said one of the school board members was talking about having $10,000 in her account to pay her taxes. And yes, I have that feeling too. Like I finally get money and then I have to pay my taxes. So that's just what I had. And then I was wondering too, is there going to be a hiring freeze? Because that to me would be better than having maybe if teachers were leaving at the end of the year rather than having to put them up to lose their jobs. Is that on the table?
Mr. CFO, feel free to answer it. You are past the 3, so I just want to politely ask you to conclude. If you wish to answer,
That is
go
my
ahead.
last
If not,
question.
We are seeing, or in the budget would require a position reduction. It wouldn't be freezing. Freezing would require 2 points. To run this year next year, we would, with no changes, would be to 2.4 if we did not reduce staff. So a freeze essentially locks us into $2.4 million more because those obligated contractual costs to run it again next year are escalating. There has to be reductions.
Okay. Oh, that's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jim O'Neill, Wakefield. What I'm seeing tonight is a real problem with demographics and population and numbers. I certainly battle with this town council, and I was on it for 14 years. But we have to thank the town council because, gosh, just in the last 7 years alone, we've lost 100 students per year. And the council is really needs to be praised for keeping level funding here. You couldn't run a business if you lost your customers. And at this rate, this is unbelievable. And I'm fighting with them because they haven't gone far enough. But in perpetuity, what's that going to be? 1,000 kids are still paying $63 million? Something's got to give here. And I tell you, every other month, every year that I'm here, if you want to start with $1 million immediate profit, have our General Assembly members, if they've got 100 students leaving out of district to public schools, North Kingston, Terre Haute, and Narragansett, it should average a $10,000 price, not 20 for like one. We talked about this earlier. If you brought back 200 kids, probably be zero cost. The way our population has dropped, we probably wouldn't have any classroom issues with size. It's so obvious. Every year I ask you, what's the graduation class? Where are they going? Why don't we have a social turnout officer to follow, a bookkeeper to follow these 100, 120 kids? The money's sitting there. We're not doing anything about it. I don't understand it. And I'm blaming the General Assembly, not the Town Council, but the Town Council should put in their 2 cents. But this has got to stop. And we're barking up the wrong tree to go after the property taxpayers. They've had it. They've had enough of this. Absolutely enough. Hopefully you're listening. But they're the ones. They're the dollars of last resort. Where's our money? I come up here every year and tell you the recent ones. $1.3 billion the state gives in state aid to kindergarten through 12. And we get $5.81 million, and you're not raising hell with our General Assembly members? I told you before, and I know Mike was going to study the math. 0.4% is what we get back, and our taxpayers through sales tax, income tax, gambling, we put up what? 2.5 to 3% of the $4.2 billion budget here, and we're getting back, what, $7, $8 million in total? I see why now our proficiency level in arithmetic and math here is so bad. And I do not understand it. A couple more things, then I'll leave. This thing with ESSER, I think we've given a wonderful trigger because we moved either that 10.9 people from ESSER, which was being defunded, as you remember, at the end of 2024. Now they're part of our system. But what I just heard tonight, we can't get rid of any of those folks because of the top-down, bottom-up game that the state plays. I think I heard that right tonight. And this is crazy because we wouldn't have tracked ourselves like this. And if any of you would like, I've got the 2001-2002 budget here for this town. We had, and let me just give you the numbers, then I'll leave. We had 25 administrators at 8 schools and 4,383 people at the height of this town. We have 26.8 administrators now, 5 schools, and 2,250 kids. And this was be a budget hearing tonight. I should have had 5 minutes. I'm furious.
All right. Thank you, Jim.
Hi, my name is Kaden Tansen. I'm a parent. I'm a PTO member. I'm in and out of these schools every day. And I can tell you that these schools have contracted as much as they can. 5 years ago, 6 years ago, I agreed that we could do some consolidation, we could cut back. We are done. We are bare bones right now. I am in the school. There's not a single empty classroom in the elementary school that I'm in every day. There isn't room for teachers to have supplies. Almost every classroom is at 20, 22, 23 students. So people standing up here saying that these schools are empty, that we need to consolidate, that we need to cut more people, they're wrong. I also am standing up here as the parent of a special needs child. And I just want to say that when we cut funds, we hurt 2 populations. Paula addressed the first one. We're going to attack our students who have low income, who can't move on to somewhere else. We're going to do a disservice to our students of color. And we're going to do a disservice to all of our students who need special supports, because that is the first thing we cut. We're going to cut our speech teachers. We're going to cut our OTs. These kids need so much. And this is, I know I'm saying this again and again and again, but this is the same group of kids who went through COVID. A year and a half, 2 years on a computer, they are still making up. We are still working to make this up. I understand the federal government gave us ESSER funds to do this, and we have worked very hard, but they are not there yet. We are failing this group of students. And I guess two more things to say. We have lost students, but inflation has gone up dramatically. It has gone up faster than we have lost students. The fact that this team here and this team here is coming to you guys asking for 0.9% of a raise after being level funded for over 6 years, I mean, I'm impressed with their restraint. I'm really upset with the fact that everyone is just pushing back, saying, no, we're not going to do this. And I guess my last thing is I think that everybody here, especially the people right in front of me, need to be at the state right now, because I'm going to talk about a little bit of the elephant in the room, the federal funding, especially to our Title I schools and our special needs kids, is actually what's being gutted right now at the federal level. And I understand that the town is not there. I get that we don't have the deep pockets, but we need to be, you are our representatives. You need to be up at the state yelling and saying, how can we fund these programs? How can we not lose these students? Thank you.
Thank you. We're limited to one time, so if you haven't spoke yet, I invite you to come up.
Hi, Laura Urban, mother of two at West Kingston, also on our school improvement team. Apologize if this question was addressed when I had to step out, but I'd like to know if SK students are starting the school year at other places, charters or CTEs, and then returning to our district in a way that the charter keeps the money, but we take the student back to really accommodate their special needs, or whatever other situation wasn't adequate at the school they went to. Is that a situation that we encounter here? Where we lose money, where they keep the money and send back the kids?
The best way to describe it is we pay quarterly, and then we have to basically stay on top of the ride attendance data. And as soon as we can discover when a student returns and re-enrolls in SK, we can notify the district where we were sending that student there.
So quarterly, we wouldn't lose a whole year. We might lose part of the quarter.
But when we try to stay on top of it.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. I want to echo a couple other points that were made. I don't want to belabor and keep us here much later. Just the equity issue is really important. The downward spiral that we've seen, the COVID situation. I feel like we have collective amnesia about that, but these kids are still behind socially and academically. And if we continue to not invest in the schools, then that downward spiral that I've been observing and that we've all been worried about will continue. So I hope very much that we will respect and honor this very extremely good faith effort to reduce a tremendous amount of money out of the budget and ask for a modest amount more. I don't think it's too much for us. I've asked here for tiered property taxes before. I think that we're all fighting against each other down here when a lot of the answers, a lot of the money is being sucked up to the top. In my entire lifetime has been an example of that. We've seen the worst inflation in my lifetime over these past 5 years in level funding, and I'm just ready to move forward, as everyone, as many people have said tonight. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, good evening. My name is Doral Beasley. So, out-of-district tuition. Our out-of-district tuition is coupled to our property tax transfer. So I'm going to set something straight here tonight. Over the last 5, now going on 6 years, our school district has not been level funded. Level funding would only occur if the enrollment in our schools was the same today as it was 6 years ago. That's not the case. This town's lost 50% of our public school enrollment over the last 23 years. The worst by far of any district in the state of Rhode Island. So when you take the 56 million that we've been given for the last 5 years and divide it by the number of students that are in our schools, every year that increases. Just over the last 3 years, the per pupil cost from the property tax transfer has gone up 18%. That's 6% a year. South Kingston now pays this year about over $30,000 per student total, second only to Narragansett. Now, what I handed out to these people up here is a chart that shows what projected enrollments are going to be for the South Kingston High School and Narragansett High School over the next 10 years. We're building a high school of 153,000 square feet that will hold 720 students using the calculations that Studio J used. 60% for regular students, 40% for CTE students, 720 students. I'm sorry you all don't have this chart here. 10 years from now, what it shows is the NESDEC forecast for South Kingston High School is 436 students. So there's 284 students that we don't have projected not to have, 286. When the high school goes below 400 students, it starts to become, it loses its functionality. That's already happened in Narragansett. Their enrollment this year is 397. Of those 397, only 260 come from Narragansett. The only way that we're going to keep our high school filled, and forget the low-cost housing we're going to be building. You're not going to get 284 students coming from that. The only way we're going to keep that high school filled is by regionalizing the Narragansett. That's it, okay? Now.
All right, Joel, you're a bit over. We'll give you some rope.
Okay, let me just, give me like 30 seconds.
Go ahead.
All right. If we, this year, between our two towns, we're employing 600 people. Narragansett has busing. We don't have busing. If we regionalize the Narragansett and we do it right, it won't negatively affect our teachers because we're going to allow them to leave when they would leave. But the end result has to be that the two towns become one for our school district. Because what it will do is lower your property tax bill by 20 to 25% when it's done.
All right, thank you, Doral. Go ahead, Mike.
The problem, regionalization is not a simple issue. And regionalization, as you're proposing it, requires two parties. This council and this town has reached out to Narragansett twice in the last 2 years, including before the bond issue on the school. Narragansett's not interested.
That's why you get 5 people in each town that run for town council, and that'll happen.
So, I do think the only part about I would like to have more information on regionalization. I just feel like I don't have an opinion, but I want to know, I want to make a decision based on the information. I don't want to go, it's a good idea or a bad idea, but I think we're all just talking about, it sounds like a good idea because both districts are clearly declining in enrollment. So I just was curious if anybody knew what potential next steps, not that we're going to do, that could be or should be. Should be you guys vote at a meeting to direct your person to do something? We vote at a meeting to direct our person to do something? How does that work? If we wanted to just gather information, is there a savings? How would it work? What would be the options? Maybe it's not Narragansett. I have no idea. Does anybody know?
From our school committee members' perspective, we've not had a discussion amongst the 7 of us, nor with our administrators at all. I don't think anybody has an opinion one way or another. I would love to think that this NESDEC prediction of 436 by the year 2034, 35, what's not factored in there is building a new high school. And so while that is clearly the trend has been predicted in the past, and we have unfortunately followed the trend, there is a distinct shift that has happened since then. But I don't know the process to request our administration or what that looks like. I do know Mr. Manny has on multiple occasions talked with Narragansett about it, but I don't know how that works either, but I don't think anybody here is like for it or against it. A conversation certainly could be had.
So I just feel like we owe our due diligence before we go borrow and build a new high school. Maybe it would make sense, like just to be, maybe, I don't know. I have no idea, but I feel like 20 years from now, we'll have all the information. We should have, could have done it right, and we'll be like, we shouldn't have done that. And I just want to try to at least get as much information.
I think there's 2 levels of regionalization, and there's a level of like the towns actually consolidating, having one town council and all that. But then there's also regionalization for the school district, and our laws regarding this in our general law, I was actually looking at the other day. I don't remember the details off the top of my head, but there's a commission that has to be voted on. That both towns have to agree to it to start. They have to work, some like a planning committee sort of to figure out how is this going to work, at least for the regionalization of the schools. So there is a process by law that it can be followed. I don't have those details off the top of my head.
Thank you.
So I think there's at least a third level, which is different towns collaborating on particular aspects without actually fully regionalizing. I don't know the details, but I know that goes on in Newport County with some of the towns in that area. There's also the other model you were talking about is Charahoe and Warren Bristol.
Correct.
So there's at least 3 levels. We could look into it. The problem is you have to have 2 parties at least that want to have a conversation.
Right.
Is also the model that Foster Gloucester has, which is no school, yes, but on the occasion that they do have school, they just regionalized the high school. The elementary schools are separate.
That's the same as the charity.
Mr. Pedraza might.
Yeah, just so folks have it, if they wanted to take a look at it, essentially, while there are other statutes that, if it gets involved and start talking about shared in proportions, but it's essentially 16.3.1 through 16.3.26 of Rhode Island general laws set up the conditions of willing participants, as well as when if the Commissioner of Education were to be compelled because of I believe it's of 100 per student. But again, 16.3.1 through 16.3.26 is the legislative component of regionalization.
16.3.1 through 16.3.6?
I'm sorry, 26, excuse me. 16.3.26.
16.3.26.
Mr. President, I was wondering if we could move it back to public comment.
Yes, we still are in public comment. If anyone in the audience who hasn't spoken who wishes to speak, anybody to come on up. All All right, we're getting toward the end here. I have a question I want to flesh out before we conclude here. With respect to the capital improvements, I know the current year, fiscal year 24-25, about 1.1 million capital improvements, and then the proposed budget under consideration tonight, 1.095 of capital improvements. Do I have that correct?
The 1.095 is just the fund balance appropriation. The total budget is about $1,142,000.
Okay.
Yep.
Now, as it relates to about 1 to 1.1 for each year that I'm asking about here. Now, with respect to those amounts, some, if not all, represent improvements to schools other than the new high school, which were identified in the RIDE application and is subject to RIDE reimbursement. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Now, something I want to get clarity on is the timing at which we would receive reimbursement. That is sort of an outstanding question we didn't have clarity on. Can you give some insight into that?
For those particular projects approved by the School Building Authority, my understanding is those are reimbursed after the project is substantially complete in the next fiscal year. So if it's substantially complete by June 30th, the town will receive that reimbursement in the ensuing fiscal year.
And do we anticipate that some of these capital improvements will go toward a project that will be substantially complete such that we would get the reimbursement in the following fiscal year?
Correct. We are attempting to select projects that will be done within one fiscal year.
Great. And those amounts will go to the town's general fund as opposed to the school's general fund?
It goes to the town. Brian can tell you where it goes exactly.
So those funds go to the debt service fund.
Okay.
They offset the school debt obligations.
That's how we intend to use them?
Yes.
Got it. All right. Thank you. All right. Any further?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
First of all, I would bring this down. I feel like Billy Crystal. I'm in this lower chair being the last guy in. I understand. It's okay. I'm the rookie gets, that's okay. You have that, John? Yeah? Well, no, I wouldn't say that.
I can't see have a better.
Well, that's it. Anyway.
They're all on chairs. Let's just take chairs.
You do too? That's why we see eye to eye right now. You're right. You're right, because I have a question for you. All right.
So move on.
Yeah, let's move on. So first of all, I just want to say that the school committee and town, we're on the same team. We do want to work collaboratively. We both have very difficult jobs ahead of us and what we're experiencing right now. It was very difficult for us to come up with even a remotely sensible budget that affects many, many people. And I think we were all trying to work in good faith with each other. And I understand I'm a taxpayer too. I just got my assessment. I was blown away, but we'll be talking about that later. But I'm just interested, trying to think outside the box a little bit. In terms of where can we find money. And I think you were pointing to this a little bit earlier, which kind of got my brain going. So I don't know if there's a policy or bylaw or a statute that I heard, and I don't know what the dollar figure is, but I heard 150% of overfunding on
OPEB.
On OPEB. So that's a pool of money. I don't know what that means in dollars. We're also talking about a future here where we anticipate that the high school, and now regionalization conversations happening, where we're looking at a trend, hopefully, that happens in the next 2 years after the school is built. So what happens if we were to find funds that are in these funded types of pools of money to use in the meantime to help with the reduction of some of these deficits that we're experiencing?
Do you want me to say something?
Go ahead, Jim. So a question start or just sort of something to think about, or both? Go ahead.
Yeah, if there's an answer and it's something to think about.
Yeah, I have an answer. First off, the other post-employment benefits, OPEB as it's called, as Brian described it, being in the, at 150% funded is a good thing. It's a great thing. We're the top 1% in the United States that has a fund like that.
We agree surplus is good.
Well, it's not surplus. It means we've been very fiscally prudent in funding all our benefits. We never kicked the can down the road. That's what attracted me to come, and Steve Alford did a great job of that. Never kicked the can down the road. Look at surrounding communities. They have done that. Other communities. Their funds, their liabilities in their towns, they're funded at 30%, 60%, maybe 80%. You always want to be funded so your liabilities are covered, correct? So you don't have structural deficits every year. That fund is not something to raid. There's $25 million in that fund. 18 is committed to our liabilities. So really you have $7 million. You can't take that money out. There's so much uncertainty right now. I agree. That fund especially, that is funded for our liabilities, a healthcare liability, must stay intact. We can cut back on the contributions, which the council is all, we've talked about that.
We do it every year.
But there is, and I will say this, there is no fund in this town that we have a surplus of money that we could just say, yeah, we can cover this. This town has been run so lean for so long, and we should be proud of that. But there's not a pool of money that we can take out and say, hey, take this or take that. Every dollar or 10,000 or 100,000 that we spend is a tax implication to it. That's why I give the numbers to the council. They can make a well-informed decision, make a policy decision. But there's so much right with this town. Our fiscal prowess is something to be applauded, not to be frowned upon. So I just had to say that because that's how I felt.
Thank you, Jim. Go ahead.
I just wanted to recognize that Rory asked a question. It was really a great question, and I don't want to make you nervous, but it was great that, I know, because he thinks sometimes it might be like a zing, and I didn't want to zing. I want to be like, no, it was a great question about the capital and then getting the money back, because I think we had talked about that multiple times, but it's really important because to me, a lot of people say we're spending, in some ways, the fund balance and your capital are going to come in and we'll fix the schools, and then the reimbursement comes to the town. It really smooths it out for the taxpayer. And people need to understand that. So their tax dollars are actually, it's a good thing. It was a great question, and I forget that part, is that it's going to help smooth out that what we all know is a very large tax increase, but at least that if we're smart and we do those projects during the school year, we can help hopefully smooth out next year. I just wanted to say that was a great question.
I'm so flattered.
I know.
Also, thank you guys for thinking of that and for doing that in that way.
Because it's our money, our town money. We're fixing the school, and then we're getting half of it back to sort of smooth out the expense of the high school. And that, right, I know it, but I don't know it, and it needs to be said a lot, because in every situation, a different set of people come here and don't understand that, and then maybe it corrects any misinformation, and it was a good reminder to me, so I wanted to say good question.
I'll just be clear and say I'm glad you finally said it.
Me?
Yes, because we've been saying it, so I'm glad you finally said it.
But think about if I'm paying attention, I'm listening, I'm here all the time, and if I forget that wrinkle, a lot of people who don't sit where we all sit and have different skewed views don't understand that if you spend $2 million on capital projects that are in the stage 2, we're getting 53% back, and that's going to be used to smooth out the debt.
It's a rebate, basically, like in the olden days when you used to send in your little things.
The rebate.
It was before your time, Rory, but we used to do that.
You're ahead of your time with your question, though.
Yeah.
I'm flattered again.
So thank you for asking that question, and we get to explain it again to people.
All right, that's going to bring us to the end. Good meeting, good discussion, great deliberations here. Thank you all for coming. Preliminary budget adoption is on Monday, March 17th. So I invite you all to stay tuned, come to the meeting. There will be a public hearing, and see you then.